to be agitated. And I just want to throw in there too is that we want to make sure we're clear here too that there was definitely people that was splinter groups from other people that were trying to peacefully protest. This group, either or portions of groups, had their own plan, their own ideas, and were executing those things. The vast majority of people that arrived that night did not want to be involved in this type of behavior, and we saw that. So that's kind of a point where we started saying we're going to have some more complex issues than we've had in the past, where people are actually touching officers, pushing officers. We've never had that kind of resistance.
You can see on the last slide, that's when some of the protesters, again, the few at that point that started to throw some debris, essentially mostly water bottles at that point were coming at the officers up on Congress Street. About 8:36, officers take a knee to show solidarity with the crowd. And then we'll just play that video, get a sense of it.
Hey, Nielsen, you go over there, you stay over here. Over here, Frank. Hey, up.
They keep pushing in. We keep coming back.
Hey, just don't. Can you guys take a step back, please? Take a step back.
Standing here the whole time.
No, you keep pushing your way out. Hey, take a step back, please. Take a step back, please. Take a step back. Take a step back. Take a step back. Take a step back. Take a step back.
We're not blocking the sidewalk.
Take a step back.
We're blocking the road.
Just don't give this up, all right? Stay right here.
Join us!
It's not that hard. 2 seconds. They took our knee.
So the crowd itself up there, still at Central Fire Station area, is escalated at this point. There's more people that are starting to throw some rocks and bottles. By about 8:41, the lieutenant expresses concern that the protesters are starting to make threats, in addition to throwing bottles. And you can kind of get a sense, actually, from that last video that we watched, as to kind of how it was set up itself. You'd have the line, and later on, there would be the line essentially that was interacting most directly with the protesters. And then somewhere in the rear of the line was the supervisory element. So whether it was a sergeant or a lieutenant, or later on the major, the sergeants, and the lieutenants were all involved with oversight from the rear. So protest leaders encouraged the group to show some respect. Again, consistent theme throughout was that sort of messaging. And about 8:44, the group slowly starts heading back towards the police station. So group 2, again, which was the group that went down middle to spring to high up to Congress, and then back down to City Hall, departs at about 8:25, heading west on Congress. About almost 8:30, deputies report the group is agitated. About 8:31, the group's throwing objects at deputies. A couple minutes later, there's some self-Portland units that are blocking High in Congress that, similar to what we already witnessed on Franklin Street, were being surrounded with cruisers being pounded on. And then about 8:40, the group turns and heads back to 109 Middle Street as well. So now at this point, everyone that had splintered off and broken up is returning back to the police station. So group 2 on the way back, they're blocking intersections at Free and Union and Spring at Cross Street. Here's one interaction from that group.
I can't, man. I gotta stay in the car. I'm trying to protect you guys. I'm trying to protect you guys. Can you please? I'm trying to protect you guys. Can you please go outside of the car?
Holy shit, how about that?
Can you please? I'm asking nicely.
No, you're racist. You're racist.
Across street is blocked. The county deputies cannot make it back that way there.
Dude, I can't stay in my car. I'm trying to help you guys out. Can you please? Can you please get over there?
No, you're taking me with this, man.
Can you please get? I'm not racist. Can you please get over there?
Female climbs on the hood of a car and others surround the cruiser and are throwing things. Again, so similar behavior to what we had originally witnessed on Franklin Street. So heading back at 109 Middle Street, which is the police station, just before 9 p.m., the protesters who have remained at 109 Middle Street are rejoined by the group from Central. The group totals about 1,000 at this point. And there were people going up to Congress Street at one point. There were people when, you know, kind of the bottles started being thrown and some more confrontational behavior started taking place with the police. There were people that I had passed that spoke to me that were just, they didn't want any part of it. They were leaving and they're like, they were done. So again, we're about 1,000 at this point. So in addition to Portland PD, there's a list of the other agencies that had been requested and had sent at least a couple people at that point. About 8:45, a small fire is ignited just outside in the mulch, just outside of headquarters here. Short time later, an anonymous caller reports a male with an assault rifle is on Commercial Street between India and Franklin. A few minutes after that, Cumberland County deputy reports protesters possibly carrying incendiary devices, which is essentially fire starting type of materials. And again, same time period, protesters are throwing bottles at officers, including this video here that shows this is actually the perspective of the camera is looking towards Middle Street from the back entrance to our Portland PD parking garage.
Shift under 622.
Go ahead.
604 when units will be headed your way momentarily.
Excellent. We just had a bottle thrown at us, but civilian.
And again, a few minutes later, two protesters advised officers at the station that somebody had dropped off a backpack at the intersection of Franklin and Middle and had run off. So with everything else that the officers are dealing with, they're considering what possible threat could be in that package for, particularly around a group of such a large group. So for group two, the protesters continue to block traffic cars as they make their way back towards the police station. And between 9 and 9:15, multiple cruisers are blocked in by the crowd.
We're clearing right now, 200 falling.
21, trying to move. Hammond County 21 surrounded, trying to move. 21, are you Franklin in the middle?
204, we're at Pearl Mill.
County 21, are you at Franklin in the middle? Hammond, got it. Any units that can assist the county units, Franklin in the middle, being surrounded?
Multiple cruisers being surrounded, County.
Hammond, command 4.
I copy. 500 should have a team that can move in that direction.
500.
We got the cruisers out over here. You need us back on the other side?
Yeah, can you head over to Franklin in the middle? They're being surrounded, multiple cruisers.
Copy that.
We're clearing right now.
Let's see if we can fix that. And I know the screen's getting blurry again. Let me see if we can do something about that. Good. So we're trying to break out cruiser windows in the area of Middle and Pearl Street. Protesters are chanting peaceful protests. The leaders are attempting to clear the crowd, but most continue to block the cruisers until additional officers arrive on foot. About 9:15, the team responds to assist the deputies whose cruisers have been surrounded. One protester uses his bike to repeatedly block officers, and we'll just play that video to give you, again, a sense as to the physical barriers that they were using.
Don't get in my way. Do not get in my way. Rally on the cruiser.
And again, it talks about after checking on the deputies, the officers are taunted and berated by the crowd, and then ends up one of the officers takes a knee and participates in a group hug with the protesters that were there in that intersection. So at about almost 9:15, there's a call stating that individuals broke the windows at 188 Middle Street, and people were inside looting the store. Second reports indicates a group of 40 were in the area, and units are sent to clear the store.
Actually, 200. Just to let you know, we're getting a call that they've broken the door at Urban Outfitters, 188 Middle Street. They're currently looting. 6 people inside.
Bob, you want us to come back there?
Anybody going to Outfitters?
We're holding right now, Pearl. We're the closest folks to it, and we will get to it once we resolve into this crowd.
Unit inquiry about Urban Outfitters. I have units in the area, but they're dealing with a crowd. So right now, nobody's responding.
500.
500.
Taking the polling guys I had with me, the 7 to Franklin and Middle. State Police is with 200, and I just sent 3 county deputies who showed up their way.
Okay. So the group's still in front of the police station and continues until about 9:10 when organizers advise the group to go home. About 9:18, about half the group departs the area, leaving about 500 protesters. And the group remains and continues protesting in front of 109 Middle Street. About 9:27, the chanting is interrupted by a semi-truck that pulled through heading eastbound on Middle Street right in front of the police station. Essentially, the unit that was at the intersection of Pearl and Middle, intending to block traffic from approaching that area, was surrounded by a group of protesters at that time, and the semi-truck ended up making it through. So this is the sense as to what that looked like. Okay. Again, so the semi-truck goes through the front of 109 Middle Street where a large group was gathered at the time. They kind of flowed with and followed it. The other group that was right in the intersection of Middle and Franklin, as you can see here in the photo, also kind of follow the tractor trailer through the intersection, and then it ends up stopping just on the other side of the intersection in the area near Hugo's and Eventide, where it's pulled over.
600 to Command 4. Do we have that react team anywhere? We've got a semi that's starting to block in the front of Middle Street.
Command 4 for 500. Are you tied up? We got a large crowd. What do we got?
We have a semi there blocking it in the middle of Middle Street, right in front of 109.
A semi truck?
A semi truck.
Copy.
Well, it's still rolling east on Middle, but they're trying to break the windows on the driver's door.
Command 4 for 500. I didn't copy your location.
He's at Middle and Franklin. The truck has gotten through to the other side of Franklin and now stopped, being surrounded by people. Units, they pulled the driver out of the semi-truck and are converging on him.
So let's go.
Okay.
So is that in front of 109?
No, in front of the dirt lot.
22. We're going to move out. So if we're going to hold our line.
Tower.
Full truck is surrounded at Franklin.
Tower.
22. We got eyes on that driver yet?
I've lost him in the crowd. Any unit with eyes on the driver, please advise.
Command 4 for 500. 500. We're going to need more people down here. It's getting out of control. Command 4 for 500. If you can secure the driver, pull back to 109 so that we can get more bodies. We do not have more to send you without giving up 109. Yeah, we got the driver. We gotta get the passenger out, or they're gonna hurt him.
500, copy. You have the driver trying to get the passenger out.
500. Give me a 20 on 503.
503. Headquarters to Portland, 503.
503, we got the guy over at the south side of Middle and Franklin by the cruiser. We're getting attacked.
10-4.
600. I've got 7 county guys headed that way.
10-4. 7 county guys headed to Franklin and Middle.
642, we're at Franklin and Middle. Where is somebody getting attacked?
The south side of Franklin and Middle by the cruisers.
606, we have deputies and officers around us. We're fine for now.
Now we're 606 surrounded with other officers. Well, units Franklin and Middle, so you can make your way.
203, 2 sets of deputies are coming southbound on Franklin.
Now 4 deputies headed southbound on Franklin.
500.
500.
Yes. The truck is locked. We are pulling back to the intersection.
Now our truck is lost, pulling back to the intersection.
503, the guy driving the truck, we got to get him out of here. They're all throwing stuff.
Right, take him back behind the station.
We got to get those cruisers out of there. We don't have the manpower to get up to them.
Command 1, there's 7 coming your way from the back of 109. New State Police just arrived and 2 deputies.
Guy, I have 4 heading to the semi-truck. 503 to 500.
Good.
How are we going to get this guy out of here?
I'm right here.
204, where's the driver? We're at the truck.
204, back away from the truck. We have the driver. We're all set with the truck. Back to Middle at Franklin.
Are officers still needed, and if so, where?
500.
Go ahead.
Do you need more officers there, and if so, exactly where?
We're working through it. We're trying to get the guy out of here that was driving. The truck is locked. It's unoccupied. They're pelting it with bottles, but we're all set right now.
Yeah, for 406, if you could hold the line, I guess, in front of 109.
600 to command.
And again, that's just an aerial view from the station showing where the truck came to rest on the other side of the intersection. The crowd that approached it, you could obviously tell from the radio traffic, the tension and the uncertainty that was going on in terms of the driver's safety. There was some questions at the time as to, what the driver's intent was. And this is actually, so still no protesters have been arrested yet. This is actually the first arrest of the evening. The driver was arrested at that point, brought back to the police station, and ended up being charged with reckless conduct with a dangerous weapon, the truck. So the crowd shifts to Franklin Street, south of Middle, in response to the officers taking the truck and the driver into custody. And numerous officers are deployed to that area to try to help to keep the peace. About 9:45, the on-scene lieutenant directs the officers to return to the police station. So they started kind of heading back to the PD, but the individuals themselves were following them, still engaging them. So concerned that the group would follow them back to the station, the officers stop at the intersection of Middle and Franklin Street on the north side and set up a line. Okay, so you can see from the video there, I mean, what's going on essentially, but also the Portland officers are still not equipped in riot gear at this point. We still have the other officers that have come onto the scene, being called to that situation that are equipped, and those are the folks that you see in the video. So Group 2 is at Middle and Pearl Street at this point. And about 9:15 or starting around then, the organizers are encouraging that group to go home. Most are remaining with some some of the reports of looting going on about a block away and the group becoming increasingly agitated. About 9:24, the lieutenant on scene calls for additional officers. The protesters link arms at that point and settle down. And the lieutenant actually, as well as Commander Sweat, make a comment over the air that that was a positive thing, and hopefully it continues.
Offloaded and dispersed, and believe it or not, they left. We were going to be using our officers, bringing them back to the PD from this post at Pearl and Middle.
If we can keep that trend, that'll be very good.
Offloaded.
So still at Middle and Pearl, again, with the issues being caused a block away, the issues caused by the chaos of the semi-truck that just went through, the lieutenant there, who's Lieutenant Doherty, issued an order to disperse to that group, and the group, in fact, complies with that order and slowly leaves the area. So just generally, in regards to crowd control tools that were available and used during the course of the evening, foggers, which is pepper spray. A fogger, essentially, it's an oleoresin capsicum, or OC spray is another term that you might use when people are talking about it. Pepper ball is essentially a compressed air system that deploys a breakable or a frangible round plastic ball similar to a paintball, but instead of being filled with paint, it's filled with powder. Pava it's called, but it has like OC type powder in it that when it hits the ground, it hits lower extremities, it will break open and disperse people from the area. 40 millimeter foam baton. There was no impact with anybody during the course of the week's events with that, but just an option that the team has. Baton themselves, which you've seen already in a number of the videos, that the officers will hold generally in front of them in a horizontal manner in order to help to delineate and form a line and provide some sort of a presence or appearance of a show of force. The shields are obviously for protective, shields and helmets aren't on here, but shields and helmets are both for protective purposes as well, in order to keep any sort of projectiles or anything that are thrown at officers from doing damage. And then just a note at the bottom, just because obviously there was a lot of misconceptions. Other parts of the country use tear gas, rubber bullets. We did not use any tear gas or any rubber bullets on June 1st or during any other protest during that week. All right, so again, we already talked about 9:10 is when the organizers initially started sending people home, telling them the protest was over. So about 9:50, the protest is over, the organized protest anyway. The individuals remaining are concentrated at the intersection of Franklin and Middle, and a smaller number are still out in front of the police station. A small group has started to make its way east on Middle Street to the parking lot behind the Hampton Inn. And the group that remains is pretty agitated, and we've already talked about the other group at Middle and Pearl Street that's already dispersed. So we're mostly dealing at this point with the group right adjacent to the police station in the intersection of Franklin Street at Middle Street. So about 10 p.m., the PD starts receiving a number of burglar alarm notifications, several 911 calls reporting that businesses were being broken into in the Old Port area. Oops. Stand by. In total, we ended up seeing 33 businesses that were either burglarized, damaged, or looted. Additional reports of trash cans were also being called in as being set on fire at that time, with at least one or two that I know of had been with candles that were put into the trash can. Actually, down on Commercial Street. It's a little blurry. They're working on clearing that screen for you. There we go. Starting about 10 p.m., the PD received a number of, oh, we already did this one, sorry. So about shortly before 10, protesters have positioned themselves directly in front of the line of officers, throwing water bottles, chanting a variety of different things. The lieutenant advises officers, just let them, yell, do not engage them. About 9:56, there was a barrage of bottles that were thrown at officers.
It's being killed every fucking day for no fucking reason. Hey, Steve, you took his name out of our county before you fucking got here, man.
No throwing. No throwing. All right. Flog him. Flog him. Back up! You are being ordered to disperse! You are being ordered to disperse! Go! Go home! Go home!
Yes, this is no falling you down to 500, right?
Yeah, so that was the lieutenant that was at this point issuing the first order to disperse at that intersection, and ended up authorizing the use of an OC fogger or spray that you could hear being deployed at the folks that were agitated and throwing the bottles. So protesters are still throwing bottles at officers, and civilians advise them to go home. Again, there's still a number in the crowd that are trying to get folks to leave, get folks to comply with the order that's been given. We already talked about the dose of pepper spray that you saw in the last video. Some begin to disperse, but others can just continue to throw bottles. And at 9:58, the lieutenant issues the second dispersal order or warning. About 10:03, we're about 3 hours into the event, almost an hour after the organizers had told the peaceful protesters to go home. 10:06, a group of individuals runs west on Middle Street, breaking into Urban Outfitters, which is 188 Middle Street a second time. We get that report by radio, and a few minutes later, protest leaders are admonishing those throwing water balls and attempting to get the group back on message with some chants. Quarter past 10 at this point, lieutenant gives a third order to disperse. Protest organizer immediately starts telling protesters to leave, saying that if you're truly here for the right reasons, go home.
If you're truly fighting for the right reasons, go home, please. Please go home.
You can see that's the activity out in front of essentially where the line is at, back away from the crowd itself. So the lieutenant repeatedly asks the protesters, tells the protesters it's time to go home. Organizers are doing the same. 10:19, lieutenant issues another warning. Officers step back to the crosswalk, and a group of protesters stand their ground, others sit in the road, link arms, and others approach officers and shout at them. So at 10:20, again, a little over an hour after the peaceful protests had ended, 3 hours after the start of the protest itself, the first 2 arrests are made. All the rest of the arrests, when you see that reference to that, are for failure to disperse, which is under state law, there is provision if people are engaged in disorderly conduct. If a group of people engage in disorderly conduct, it gives law enforcement the right to cause people or order people to disperse the area. They're also obviously, obstructing a public way, but all the charges themselves were for failure to disperse from this point forward. So a protester makes a run at officers standing in front of the arrestee. The lieutenant directs the officer to spray the protester. Protesters throw bottles and rocks at the officers. We'll give you a sense of what that looks like. Sure. So what you're seeing here, just to kind of give you a little perspective, because I know it's pixelated, is the line that's right now on the crosswalk is the line of police officers. So everyone to the left of that screen is essentially, or everything to the left of that screen is essentially law enforcement. Everything to the right is essentially the remaining protesters. You may not have seen it, but in front of the line of police officers, or really between the two groups, the lieutenant that was that was in charge on the street down there, and the protest organizer themselves was walking back and forth. They're talking. He's like, "Hey, whatever you can do to help them move along." The protest organizer was asking the group to move along. The police were telling them to move along, and they don't. So actually, the police at this point, you noticed, backed up away from the protesters themselves, back to the area of the crosswalk. And what you're going to see here in a minute is the officers ended up effecting an arrest on one of the agitators up in that area at the top, with the top center of the screen. And the I don't know if can you see the pointer that's actually on the screen itself? So where she's indicating that's the arrest team that you'll see. They'll move up, they'll effect an arrest, and then you'll end up seeing the crowd move towards the arrestee, and then a dose of pepper spray is deployed from a fogger, and the crowd backs away from that. So just want to give you some perspective and keep playing. All right, so that is the first two arrests being made on Franklin Street. Protester makes, again, we already kind of went there, kind of made a run at the officers, was arrested. When he was arrested, the group kind of started to converge on the arrest team and the officers. And you could see them kind of dispersed away from the deployment of the pepper fogger. Individuals continued to throw objects at officers lined up on the north side of the intersection. And the protesters mostly stand on the south side, with some individuals attempting to calm the crowd still. So 10:22, a third arrest is made. Again, it's a failure to disperse. Lieutenant continues to advise the crowd to leave. Officers move forward about 10 feet into the intersection. What you'll see, there's some sequence and clips here, and the major can speak to it probably more in a couple minutes, but very small incremental steps are being taken by that line. I mean, the lines, we backed off originally back to the crosswalk area, and literally, 10 feet at a time, roughly 15 feet at a time was the majority of the forward movement that the line made while the orders to disperse were still being given. 10:25, the crowd is relatively quiet but continues throwing rocks and bottles. Officers are strategizing over organic methods to encourage the crowd to disperse. A little after 10:30, we're beginning to move forward towards the center of the intersection. Again, the officers' line is heading south, towards Commercial Street, and bottles are still being thrown.
Heads up! Heads up! Heads up!
That was like some Matrix.
And Lieutenant, a few minutes later, gives a fourth formal order to disperse. And when I say formal order, he's, again, he was talking with the organizer earlier. He's much more consistently asking people to leave, trying to get people to kind of move along and to go home, those sorts of messages throughout as well. So you can see where the officer's line has moved from the, at about 10:38 from the crosswalk to the left of the screen back to about the center, a little bit further in the center of the intersection itself. And this is, so Middle Street's kind of running quasi up and down in this photograph. Franklin Street's the one running left to right, with the right direction being down towards Commercial Street. And for the next 20 minutes, officers attempt to slowly walk the crowd away from the police station in hopes that they'll disperse on their own. Not very effective in that regard. Virtually not a lot of people leave. The lieutenant issues a 5th dispersal order at almost 11 p.m. So the officers repeatedly advise individuals that if they don't move, they will go to jail, trying to send a message that they are essentially, by being in the street and being there at this point in violation of the direction to disperse, that they are violating the law. Protesters remain agitated and repeatedly attempt to engage officers.
No! Can you please back up for us?
You guys can walk by me, but I'm not getting past.
Come on, just back up, please. We're not here to mess with you, really.
All right.
Thank you. I do appreciate it.
So again, you can hear some rational dialogue still going on between the officers and people in the crowd at this point. We're not here to mess with you, the officer says. I really appreciate it. I mean, again, there's some conversations going on. About 11:05, the 4th arrest is made outside of Hugo's on Middle Street. Almost 11:15. The lieutenant's continuing to give orders to disperse. A group of individuals are seen running south on Franklin Street toward 4th Street. The commander directs dispatch to advise the Hampton Inn to lock down their building. One of the Cumberland County deputies is struck in the face with a can around the same time, and a med-Q is advised to stage at Munjoy in their rig and ready to go. I think was the radio traffic that was used. 11:18, arrest near with concrete barrier in front of Hugo's. And during a search incident to arrest, it was determined that that person was carrying bricks in his pocket. There was a group that kept going back into an alleyway, kind of like behind the Hampton Inn area, where they would retrieve some bricks, some rocks, that sort of thing, come back out, throw them at the officers, go back and re-up. And that continued. And again, that was something that was found in this particular arrestee's pocket. There's some bottles on the table from Eventide that were thrown at officers. And we'll play this video and
Chief, you're muted.
Just going to jump in here. I was down supervising the line at the time. So at this point, what we were dealing with is multiple groups. There was a group that was on the east side of Franklin, and then a group still on the west side of Franklin, all on Middle Street, and then a group occupying Franklin. The group, as the chief just said, on the east side of Franklin, were using that alleyway and the cover of the semi-truck that was stuck in the middle of the road to really come up and throw the glass bottles, the rocks, that kind of stuff. So at this point, we were really moving very slowly and made the decision that we were going to have to deal with that crowd on the east side of Franklin first. So we ended up just moving officers very slowly. A couple of arrests were made over there, and we were able to get the crowd on that side to disperse. And we set up a very sparse line of officers in front of that truck so that we could hold that line, knowing that as the officers continued to work their way south on Franklin, there wasn't going to be a group that came back in behind them. At this point, also, the main line on Franklin Street, we were attempting to just get them breaks, get them hydrated. They had been out on that line or different areas in the city for several hours at this point. Some of them had worked an entire day shift since 6:30 that morning. These photos just kind of show you at the point that we are trying to divide these crowds. You can see that we have a line of officers there in front of the truck. And then that there is still a group that is right in front of Hugo's. That's about the time that that umbrella was thrown. And that's when we're deciding we're going to have to move them out of there so that we continue working on Franklin Street. So about 11:30, the group is relatively calm with occasional items and objects being thrown. About 11:45, several bottles of urine are thrown from the back of the group at a PPD officer and a trooper drenched in urine. At 11:45, an ad hoc leader of the group admonishes those who are throwing objects and directs them to go home. About 11:47, another bottle of urine is thrown at officers.
To the parking garage.
I would say at this point, we pushed back just west of our steps. They could come right down on the middle street and meet us right here.
Copy.
Command 3 to dispatch, just have logged. There's been a few more bottles thrown over the crowd.
Tower.
422.
422, go ahead.
I forgot, I'm on the wrong channel again.
It's okay.
600 to Command 4. There's 9 SP headed your way, right down middle.
Command 4, I got an SP unit coming over to meet him.
They're throwing bottles of piss at us.
I have 3 copy. They're throwing bottles of urine.
Command 4, Command 3, I'm going to deploy pepper ball on the line if you're good.
Yeah, go ahead with that. Pepper ball, OC only.
Command 4 for 600.
Go ahead.
Do you have Terrio up there with a pepper ball system?
I do.
Can you spare him for me?
To the parking garage.
So at this point, as you heard, when the officers started taking urine and being hit with urine, we were still taking glass bottles and rocks. That's when I communicated to the commander who was in the incident command that I was going to deploy pepper ball on the line. The idea being that a lot of these objects were coming from the back of the line. So our foggers and the pepper spray is just not effective on those folks. The commander gave the go-ahead, and what I did is I positioned 2 pepper ball systems on opposite sides of the line and directed the officers to target anybody who was throwing items at the line. The way the pepper ball system works is the training is consistent with shooting on the ground or in the lower extremities in front of a person. That causes a cloud of the pepper powder and will cause the irritation that is desired. It can be directed at a person. We are trained to avoid the head, neck, groin, and spine areas, but generally, if you can fire directly in front of someone, it is the best result, and that was how the officers were instructed. So about 11:54, an unidentified citizen advises an officer that people are digging up rocks from the PD parking lot and passing them out to the agitated crowd. And about 11:55, an individual is arrested in the PD parking lot carrying a bottle of urine. 11:56, officers observe individuals filling water bottles with an unidentified substance. 11:56, additional dispersal orders are issued by the lieutenant, and at 11:57, individuals throw rocks at the officers, and the pepper ball is deployed again. So at 12:04, officers slowly move forward. 12:11, another arrest is made. 12:12, bottles are thrown at officers. At 12:14, another order to disperse is given. 12:18, officers observe individuals urinating into bottles. 12:19, report of individuals digging up bricks from the sidewalk. 12:36, Portland PD deploys available helmets, shields, and masks to the line. We do have crowd management equipment, and as the night progressed on, we were getting officers out there so quickly that we were not able to get the shields and helmets out to them as quickly as I would have liked. So that happened at about 12:36 a.m. 12:41 reports that individuals are applying graffiti to Sebago and Hampton Inn, and pepper ball is launched at the vandals. And at 12:42, the crowd remains agitated. 12:47, an arrest is made. 12:54, another order to disperse is issued. 12:55, rocks and bottles continue to be thrown at officers. And at 12:56, there is another arrest. So what you can see at this point is over the last hour and a half or so, we have progressed to the point that you can see that small line that I was talking about in front of the semi truck on the east side of Middle Street. And then the crowd is condensed down. So there is nobody on the west side of Middle Street in front of the police station anymore. And the crowd is concentrated on Franklin Street, just south of Middle. One a.m., 6 hours since the protest has started, nearly 4 hours since the formal protest ended, and the protest organizers advised the protesters to go home, and it's been 3 hours since the first order to disperse was issued. 103, an arrest. Lieutenant advises the crowd it is time to go home. 105, the lieutenant encourages the remaining individuals to leave.
That's what we're trying to do. That's our goal. Well, they can't come this way. They got to go that way.
No, we're not over there.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Good night. Be safe.
At 107, there was another arrest. 109, crowd is reduced in size, but agitators remain. At 110, the lieutenant approaches several individuals on the periphery and specifically requests that they leave.
Thank you. Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome. Good night.
You know, I will say it makes me very, very proud of our officers. They've been out here for some 6 hours at this point, and they're still saying please and thank you to these folks, despite the rocks, despite the bottles. The goal really is still just to get everybody home safely and on their way. 115, officers slowly move forward towards 4th Street and arrest and continue to refuse to move out of the way. 117, lieutenant calls 7 PD officers from the line to go into cruisers to handle an anticipated increase in calls as the final group disperses. At 125, the lieutenant directs officers to arrest anyone remaining in the road. And at 1:30, officers are directed to return to the police station. So in total, there were no injuries reported by civilians. 3 minor injuries plus 2 officers were soaked in urine. Property crimes that took place, there were 4 burglaries, 4 criminal mischiefs that were broken windows, 1 criminal mischief that is listed as miscellaneous. I'm not sure what that was. 29 criminal mischiefs that were graffiti, and then arrests. There were 22 for failure to disperse, and the truck driver was arrested for reckless conduct with a dangerous weapon. This is a map kind of just showing where all those crimes took place, where they were concentrated, as you can see. Significant damage to a number of stores.
Well, that's it for the presentation itself.
Thank you, Chief Clark, and to everybody who's here as well. I'm going to look to the city manager to see if there's any comment from you at this point, John.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the we are prepared to answer any questions that you may have, and I know that that some members of the council have indicated an interest in having a conversation concerning an independent investigation. So we're also happy to chime in on that as needed or required. So
Thank you for that. And I did want to let folks know that the agenda was intended to have a few items on it, which included this report that had been requested through the city manager of police interactions the night of June 1st, as well as the discussion of an independent investigation. And thirdly, details about a summons that had been delivered to a Portland resident. And that issue, we did get a communication from the city manager earlier today about the fact that that summons issue is under internal investigation. So we won't have additional information forthcoming this evening, but all of the items on the agenda are, are things that we intend to discuss among ourselves this evening on the council. But I'll say that for now, let's take this time as an opportunity to ask questions of the police chief and other folks from the police department who are here with us this evening, and focus at this point in time on the report that's been given. So if you have your hand up, I'll call on you. And again, just a reminder to folks who are with us, we've got 67 attendees tonight watching and being here with us. Thank you for being here. Given that this is a workshop, we are not taking public comment tonight. But we do appreciate you being here, and I'm looking to the council to see if anybody has their hand up and would like to ask a question or have an opportunity to talk. Okay, great. Councillor Chong.
Thank you. It's obviously historic times and it's unprecedented, and I'm glad that no one really got hurt at the end of the day, and there were people in the community that was working with the police to make sure that everyone's safety was oops, what happened?
We hear you, Counselor.
Oh, you can hear me? Where'd my video go?
I don't know.
I still see you.
All right, if you can still hear me, that's fine. You don't need to see my mug anyways.
We can hear you and see you.
And see you, yeah.
I can't see you guys, but that's fine. That's all right. I'm glad that, no one really got hurt at the end of the day. But I was just wondering, was the Portland Review Committee involved in this report, or was it just strictly the police department? And I'm one of the counselors that was interested in the independent review, and I'm just wondering, is that going to be part B of this report, or is this the only report that we're going to be looking at this time? So I'll stop with those questions for now and then come back later and try to get my video back. Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Councillor. So the two questions, one had to do with whether or not the Citizen Review Committee was involved in the development of this report. And I'm not totally clear on what the second question was. Can you repeat it?
The second part is, is this just the first part of the complete report, or is there going to be an independent review at all, or is this the only thing that we're looking at as far as a complete report?
So I'll just jump in and say that the request for an independent report is something that we intend to discuss among the full council this evening, because that would be a bigger issue and an action by the council. So Chief Clark, can you answer the first question?
Yeah, the PCRS was not involved in this review. What we did at this point is we had, there was a couple staff people that literally went through the CAD information, our computer-aided dispatch information, the reports that officers completed, the radio traffic, and then the body-worn camera traffic, just to give, again, a sense as to the timeline and really maybe a 5,000-foot view that you can actually see what was going on. What we're doing as well, which we would always do internally, is we're always looking to, see what we can do, where we can improve, where we can go from here, is we do after-action reports that look more at tactics and those sorts of things that we can look at internally. That we'll be talking about. We'll be talking about, you know, policies, training, those sorts of things, moving forward. And but yeah, no, the PCRS was not involved to date.
I'm sorry. I'm going to keep myself unmuted. Okay, so thank you, Councillor Chong, for those questions, and we'll now go to Councillor Doosan.
Thank you, Chief. I'm interested in just kind of having a baseline of your process for kind of unbundling. You mentioned the after action report, and I think after going through sitting with the HHS committee and going through policies a couple of weeks ago, reminding myself of the department policies. So I am assuming any number of the interactions here would qualify as use of force. And I would appreciate your reminding me how you use this response to an unprecedented event, but which might be a signal of events in the future. What ways you use it what ways you unbundle it to train and talk about what could go better and on and on. So I'm not presuming to tell you what could go better. I'm just wanting to understand the internal process, the management process, how you incorporate the data around this particular series of incidents into your management going forward.
Sure. Yeah, the after actions coming in from like different, I'm off mute, from different elements of that were involved that night, from the lieutenants that had some oversight during different portions of the event. The major is actually compiling those, or has compiled those. And what we'll do is we'll go through those, and when it comes specifically to you hit right on one of the areas that we will focus on next month during July. We have a use of force review committee that will look at all the uses of force that were associated with this event, and go through those and make sure that they were compliant with in compliance with our policy. So that's something that we do as a matter of course with every use of force, regardless of the level. Anything greater than unresisted handcuffing essentially goes through a process of supervisory review and command review, and then it goes through a committee that consists of the internal affairs and some trainers. So looking at that, as an example, one of the things that we've talked about already is making a distinction between really what happened this night on June 1st, which was more of a crisis management mode. We really were not prepared to the level of the event or the activities that we ended up encountering, just internally, I should say. Just the Portland police officers that we had on staff in that moment would not have been able to handle the scenario that was put in front of us. So fortunately, with our mutual aid partners, they responded. It was more of a crisis management sort of response where we dealt with these facets as they came up. Quite honestly, to a person, the feedback that I got from our mutual aid partners in the law enforcement community was a high level of respect and admiration for the job that was done by our command staff, by our lieutenants, by our sergeants, and the command and control aspect of this, and how we broke it up and tried to maintain the greatest level of command and control over not just our own agency, but others. So what we've talked about going forward is how do we, delineate that in a pre-planning sort of mechanism. And what we've actually done going forward, because we've had other protests since this one, is, how do we break that out and compartmentalize that so that we know exactly who, it's not X officer that just showed up with a particular pepper ball system, for instance, or a particular pepper spray. It's particular officers that would, preferably from Portland PD, that would have those systems that would be designated from the get-go to make any sort of an application going forward. Was that a scenario? Did that arise to that level? So
it's always it's an opportunity. We can always we unbundle it piece by piece, which I understand your process is. we can figure out how to approach things differently. Or yeah, I am also curious to know, is there an opportunity in your process? I assume that there is, but I just would like to hear it from you, for you to unbundle some of this with some of the other departments that responded, even down to a discussion amongst the departments around how much riot gear, you're thinking that the folks who are giving aid are going to have on at what point. Or I'm not judging. Is there the opportunity to unbundle that so that all of you factor in? So for the next situation where we might be responding, yeah. So can you help me with that some too?
Yeah, and we have kind of done that to a high degree already. Again, in our pre-planning processes, we have now had people that were here, ready to be outfitted. I get designated people under the control of a lieutenant and a sergeant who would be able to deploy from here, as opposed to, again, what happened in this situation on June 1st is they deployed to the scene because officers were in need of their assistance, again, when they were being surrounded in their vehicles, for instance, at Franklin and on Franklin Street or elsewhere. That's where instead of responding here and being deployed from here, which would be the ideal scenario and what we have done since, they were responding to the scene because that's where they were going to be used that evening. So that is definitely something that we would, we'll take into account. One of the other things that we're working on at this point is, you've looked at the use of force policies at our body worn camera policy at the last HHS public safety subcommittee meeting. The other one, we do cover crowd control aspects within our policy, but we're actually focusing one of the policies that we're actually looking at is having a freestanding policy as opposed to one that's built into another patrol operations policy, a freestanding crowd control, crowd management policy that we can implement going forward that would cover a lot of the things that you're talking about in terms of what training, what equipment's authorized, what how are the teams deployed, how are they managed, how are they supervised. So yes, the short answer is yes.
And lastly, so I had this kind of three-pronged question: how do you unbundle this and use it later in your management strategy? So the third element for me is there a part of your process that would get feedback, consult with the organizers of the protest, or with folks who are participating in the protest? Particularly what I'm thinking is there was the opportunity here. I have attended maybe two of the protests. The last one I attended was it was more obvious the ways in which the organizers of the protest came prepared to try to maintain control of their own group. And I know it can get out of hand no matter how much you prepare. But you could see that the folks who were organizing the demonstrations were learning as they go, implementing different approaches as you went from one protest to the next, even though the organizers were not consistently all the same people. And so it seemed to me there might be some opportunity for the folks who were there, who would have been identified as organizing or leading on the evening of June 1st over to June 2nd, when they were at the point, when everybody was at the crisis point of trying to get people to go home, are there any ways in which we could have supplemented their trying to lead their own group? You know what I mean? So I don't know if there's I'm just asking if there's the opportunity for feedback. I don't know what the answers to that feedback are, but will we be reaching out to the consumers of our protection?
Yeah, we did make kind of indirect contact through the city manager's office, actually, and then I met with the same person on Tuesday. It wasn't one of the protest organizers directly, but indirectly we were able to make that contact. On Wednesday, I did meet with a different organizer prior to the event that started off at City Hall, because we would much rather absolutely have that initial contact and communication, because that's only going to make our job easier, and it's going to make us, you know, be able to set the stage and protect the area where the protest is going to be taking place a lot easier too. So yeah, I would absolutely hope that we would have those communications. You see, we did reach out on this occasion and on the previous Friday, and it just didn't work out.
Right, you didn't get much advance notice, but yeah, I hear you. Thank you very much. I appreciated the details, and I'll put my hand down and listen to my colleagues' questions.
Thank you, Councilor Duson. Councilor Thibodeau.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief and Heath and Jim, for your overview. And I think, you know, for me, I think what Councilor Duson was talking about was this being unprecedented. I mean, I think, you know, clearly a response to what people had seen, which was, I mean, not just somebody dying, but somebody actually being murdered from an 8-minute video. And I just think that's interesting and important context to what we saw here. You've touched upon it, Chief. So I just want to, again, acknowledge that you have touched on that issue. I also noticed, and similar to Councilor Duson, about it was the officers who, I noticed our PD was wearing what I normally see our PD wearing. And I noticed even early on that our neighboring departments were wearing helmets, or so I think that is going to be really important after action. Just because I guess my question to you is, I mean, how do we ensure that your department and our department's level of respect to our residents is going to be the same that they're going to receive from somebody who's just coming into our community? And I think maybe that's a more regional thing, because I noticed that our officers were interacting a little bit differently than surrounding neighbors were. And so that was something I noticed as well. So I would love some feedback on that. On the pepper ball system, I think, was it Heath? I think you talked about this. And I guess my question was, when was the last time that pepper ball was used? Do we know? Do we have do we keep that? I mean, I can't imagine it's used often.
You know what? I wouldn't want to give you an exact date, but there are pepper ball systems in all the supervisors' cars, and it's available to all our officers 24/7. I will tell you, we've never used it in a crowd control situation before, but there are instances on the street that we do deploy it in order to take somebody into custody. To give you the exact date, I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that.
Okay. That's very helpful. And I guess the last question that I have is about the decision on timing. And it sounded like, I mean, again, this was an unprecedented night. So I guess the question is, you talked a little bit about how when I think there was a line of officers standing on Middle and Franklin, and then you started splitting that group up into two and then moving the group out. Is the time, I think there was a 3-hour time difference between the times where you had split those groups into two. Is that a best practice? Are you waiting for the crowd to disperse on its own? What was the impetus to start moving people in that way?
Yeah, I can answer that, Counselor. So we, from the command and control perspective, are watching the entire event unfold, as you will. And what we have is a group of people at the front of the protests that are prohibiting officers from making contact with those people in the back that are actually the ones perpetrating the bottle throwing. And as you can see, just to go 10 feet in the crowd is dangerous, not effective. The tool allows us to suppress that type of behavior. It's been here and been in use for 15 plus years. It gives us the ability to engage in less lethal force and hopefully get folks to move along. So it is effective. And when we got to that point was, when the bodily fluids and other things just became constant and persistent, we realized there was specific groups in the rear They're definitely, I wanted to again say, like splinter groups that really wanted to engage in a very combative situation. That was give us the chance to actually suppress them away from the main group at that time. So the pepper ball system is an effective way to either discourage people from being in a certain area or to identify them or stop them from throwing rocks, bricks, and urine.
And then I have three more quick points. The first is on the use of any items from the federal government. I still wanted to get a list of that and maybe just a short memo. I think I requested that for HHS just to understand what we have. It doesn't sound like we have a ton of equipment, but I just want to understand what that is. The second piece of this was the use of pepper spray. And I think it was the fogger. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And the decision to deploy that was made at the time of the arrest. And was that the only use of the fogger?
No, there was multiple times that we used the fogger.
Okay.
It's basically a large container of the same OC the officers wear on their belts. At different times, it's directed by a supervisor behind the line to, obviously you could see that rush of people. It was an effective way to not have that clash. And it's not long lasting. Cold water, wash it off. You just get out of the area. It's not there. We did prepare a memo, and we're getting the information back to you on that HS report from military equipment. It's minimal, as you can imagine.
And then my last question is just something specific that you think that the department should change as to any action, anything you would have done differently, things that we learned. Is there anything?
I was running I was incident commander. Obviously, Major Gorham was on the ground. We had a unified command operation here. We had a lot of chiefs from a lot of locations. The sheriff was here, state representatives for each division. We learned a lot. We want to get in on the AAR as well, after action reports. It really brought, as bad as it is, as good as it is, whatever way you want to look at it, it forced us to get together and to work on deployment of mutual aid. And although it was in a crisis mode that night, the following nights and in the coming nights, we had plans more directly applied to when we might deploy certain forces, certain responses to certain areas. We knew it was coming to our location, so what would we do if it was at City Hall? We did kind of tabletop exercises on how we would do that, how would we stage officers. There's a great deal that we had to look at and still have to look at. But our partners, you can imagine, have been very helpful. We can't say that enough. State police came down multiple times to help us build plans, very in tune plans, and then teach us to do our own. Whereas then we teach our crime analysts to build a web page. It's actually our operations plan, which is obviously a digital plan as opposed to paper operations orders. So that forces us to go in there. We also look at tactically, how did that truck get by there? There's always questions from the community because we want to protect the citizens, and there's still no clarity to what happened, other than we know our officers were incapable of stopping it, and some people seem to move through. So there's a lot of layers of things that we're talking with our partners in, and now many of them are up in Bath Iron Works doing something different but similar.
I'll just close on that. I think we're kind of all a product of our best and our worst days, and I think the thing that I saw that that gave me the most hope was your officers on the front line actually having conversations with individuals. I thought that was really important. I think the thing that concerned me most, honestly, was the breaking of windows, the throwing of urine. I mean, that just in our community, we cannot have that as angry as we are. But we want to hear, I mean, it is inherently American for us to get in each other's faces and tell each other exactly what we think. And that was pretty clear from some of the videos as well. And they do that to me as well as I'm walking or out to dinner. So it's nothing unusual, but I just think, my hope is that as we go forward, we do so as a community. And I really appreciate the overview was extremely helpful. So thank you very much to you and, and folks on the front line there.
Council, you're welcome. And I'll just add on is if you were there, the other agencies probably haven't had the opportunity to engage in that type of one-on-one type situation of crisis. And the look on some of those individuals from different departments was a little bit of a shock when we were living it for several hours. So they learned to see how we might interact with our community, which I think is very unique, very progressive in the nature of we want to be part of the community. And certainly they got, all of their agencies got to be better from interacting with us and the community.
Thank you.
And actually, Council, I'm not sure we answered your first question about, how do we kind of control the other agencies coming in and how they're equipped and how they're, what their uniform is or doesn't consist of. And I think that does come down to that pre-planning phase that, I kind of spoke about earlier, which is just having, a designated vehicle staging area, having a designated personnel staging area, and then deploying those folks from there equipped as we want to see them equipped, whether it's, uniform wise, equipment wise, specialty weapon wise, like all those sorts of things. And I think that coupled with, I think one of the benefits that came out of this, these series of events, events during that week was we definitely increased our partnerships with our mutual aid partners. I mean, we're a very, we're a department that takes pride in the level of service and protection that we provide to the community. And, we don't often, make that call. But I think there's been a lot of benefits and partnerships, long-lasting partnerships that will result in, I think, further trainings and that sort of thing going forward. So I think that's definitely one of the takeaways that we'll have from this.
Thank you. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Thibodeau. And we'll next go to Councilor Ali. Pius, you're muted.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thank you very much for your team for this amazing presentation. It's given us a very wide perspective of what happened that night from your perspective. At what time did you know? I have lots of questions because I was typing as you were giving the presentation, and I hope we'll be able to go through them. At what time did you know that there were people from outside coming to participate in the, how do we call it, in the protest?
Councilor, I was doing the planning for the protest that day, and so in the past we've always been very successful in communicating with those that are organizing marches or protests. And for several years, I mean, we do these almost weekly with different groups. And this week leading up to this group was not communicating with us, which is always troublesome. So it was that morning that we got first information on Facebook. I think it was about bringing fireworks. We had a very minimal amount of we had a minimal amount of staff planning on blocking roads. We were not planning on the kind of violence that we saw. But I think it was late afternoon that a city employee's son saw something come across Snapchat about rioting in Portland. And through different channels, that information got to us. Then there was another third-hand report where somebody called into the Howie Carr show and said that there was going to be looting in Portland and that Antifa was coming. So that was all within just a couple hours of the 7 p.m. start time.
Right. I was going to, you've answered one of my questions that the Snapchat came from city employees. I was going to ask you, how did you know, how did you have the Snapchat information? And I think actually the organizers of that particular night did reach out to the city manager. I think twice. One time it was facilitated by Councilor Thibodeau. And later in the day, I also encouraged the young man who organized that night because I know him. And I don't know whether it happened, but he told me he reached out to the city manager. Secondly, the caller that did mention Antifa, I did type something here on my iPad, so let me see if I got it right. There was a caller that identified Antifa. Does your office have any opinion about that group?
No,
So you don't have you know who they are, but you don't have any opinion about them.
we've never dealt with them here in Portland.
Okay. Is there a, oh, come on.
I think the important element he was trying to make is that there was coordinating information that was coming in that matched. We don't care if he said Antifa or White Wall or something.
Okay.
When you start to see those information sources add up to more aggressive looting and it starts to come to fruition, it isn't so much who's telling you, it's that these things add up.
There was a video that had a group of young people or kids berating the police. Do we know the racial made-up of that group?
You know, no.
No.
No? Okay. I know that in the beginning you did mention like you don't want to identify some people by their names. You don't have to say their names. I just want to know if they are our officers or officers from outside. There was an officer who said something like, let me see what I got here. This is not gonna end up well from inside the cruiser. I think it's at the beginning of the your presentation. You don't have to mention him by name, but is that one of our officers or is that one of the officers who are coming from outside?
Do you mean the car that was surrounded with them paying?
Yeah.
On it? Is that the one?
Yeah, that is the one I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one of our officers. That was one of our lieutenants that's been here almost 30 plus years. And it was a extremely tense moment. There was the first signs of this is not good. You know, these are parts of our AAR. Maybe we should have recognized right then and there that, you know, why would people rush the car like they did and the hundreds of people rushing the car? And what would one feel like to be in that car, not knowing what the intentions are when we've seen nationally cruises burning and flipped over? I could see, we listen to the radio, so we can tell inflections and tones. We know that officer was pretty concerned for his well-being as we sent a REACT team over to try to get him go there. But we did have support from community members that said this isn't where we want to go with this. How that split in groups are, how they communicated, we know it was social media and back channels. But when he says it's unwell, he's talking about his own position. And if you had heard other traffic, I was encourage him to stay fast. We were sending help. Don't move. Make sure it's in park. But certainly there was a level of concern that Lieutenant had. Been here 30 years, and certainly I had a level of concern very early that there was a lot of signs that were very different than what we've seen in the past. So I don't think he was saying that the night would end bad or we'd have what we had at the end. I don't think any of us could have expected to see what we did see. I think he was talking about in that moment, and it wasn't pleasant to watch for me, being one of the commanders, looking out the back of the building and seeing hundreds of people surround 3 of our cars with 1 officer in each, 2 in 1. Just not what we would expect within the first movements of the group.
Right. Let me see. I said I have a lot of questions. I've typed all of them and they all mix out, but let me separate this question from the others. Officer Swart did say that there were kids being directed. They weren't organically doing things. Do we know who was directing them?
There was a woman that I saw. It isn't in the nature of the police department to collect information on protesters. And I recognized the woman. I don't know her by her name, but she went to, there was 2 young people talking to me, and they saw what was happening and they apologized. And this person came to them and said, you're not supposed to talk to the police. You were told move along right then and there. That same person was one of the persons up at Central Fire Station, told the people, time to go back to the police station. And I'm paraphrasing, there was some communication, language or whatever they might have been doing, but it was clear direction to certain groups. But as you know, and I'm trying to make sure we're very clear, we're just talking about a very small group of people that had designs, if you will, to not protest in a manner that was expected by many others, with children, with other adults, with other people in the citizens, people coming off Munjoy Hill, walking down to this event. I would never expect them to see what we saw out here. And I don't think any of you would have expected to see what we would have saw out there as well. So I just think it's a very limited group of people. Unfortunately, who knows who may have tackled that group of people in the sense of getting them to do what they want. But we didn't identify them, and I don't think it would be appropriate for us to identify different leaders of different protest groups, regardless of what they were doing. She wasn't doing anything criminal, and certainly it isn't our job at that point to identify her as an individual.
And you mentioned social media back, what is that you said earlier? Social media back channels. What is that?
Social media, I didn't hear the last part.
Back channels.
Oh, yeah, yes. I'm sorry. Basically, people would be calling officers' wives. The fire department would be calling us. It was what we did glean for it afterwards in some of our after action reports. Some of the actions were directed through Snapchat in different portions, and social media was a platform that they knew was a transit material we could see later. So that's the back channels we talk about are just not 911 calls or something we're seeing right away. It's just someone's telling us they're seeing this, or forwarding a copy of a picture of a Snapchat is back channels, if you will.
Okay. Officer Swart, can you tell me more about the resources from other towns, and how many other officers came to join you that night?
We probably won't go into the specific numbers because those are tactical decisions and planning decisions.
Okay.
We had continued to ask for resources. Other communities throughout all the way to Lewiston were following our radio traffic, and when they heard other people calling, they were calling, asked if we need assistance. We knew how many people are here, if that's what you're asking. Where we got to a point where we felt we could stabilize the situation with the men and women that arrived from our communities. The number, like I said, and where we staged what we did is more of a tactical.
I think you also, so will you say that we are the biggest or the largest district in the state?
District 2 is, if that's what you're talking about. Portland Police is the largest municipality. State Police is actually the largest police organization. They had some of the specialty units that we could ask to help us out. So I think municipalities, we are the largest police department.
So yeah, and this was an unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this. Some of the small towns officers that came to join us that night, will you agree with me that they've never, Portland have never seen anything like that? The others who came to join you, will you say that they don't even have any experience in engaging any kind of protest, because they may not have had even a smaller version of what we had that night?
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that certainly that none of us had dealt with, I've been here 30 plus years. I've never dealt with a riotous situation where I call it a near riot situation when we have looting. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, I never would have thought that. I grew up here. But the officers, when they came, and the major, as well as I did, in the command staff that showed up here, we continued when we were with them to encourage each officer, because yes, when someone's working in Falmouth, Yarmouth, Cumberland, some of those smaller towns, they're certainly not used to the volume of people. They're used to conflict. Many of the District 2 that we are engaged with, which is all of our surrounding police departments in Cumberland County, engage in the same level of professionalism with de-escalation techniques, with crisis intervention training, verbal judo. I don't want to be too repetitive, but certainly the volume they don't see it, but they do see it on a lower scale. But I think if you were out there to see it, I was going to each member, the new person's coming up, and encouraging them to be, stand fast and wait for the help.
I have like a few more questions. One is, did any officer made a mistake during the protest, or let me reframe it? What did you got wrong during your interaction with the protesters?
There was a few things I'll just get into. I'm not going to get into specific officers, but we were communicating to officers to stay further away from the groups, and then they got surrounded, and we lost a resource for a period of time, or we lost an intersection for a period of time. I don't think we drilled down to each individual person and what they did that night, as opposed to collectively, how can we do a better job? We certainly can do a better job.
My last question is not about this protest, it's a general question. So before today, I did a couple of research, and I don't know whether it is you or the chief or city manager who will answer this, because maybe the person who have been here the longest should answer the question. In 2003, there was an investigation of the Portland Police Department by the Obama administration, and they made a lot of recommendations on how you will interact with during arrest, and how you engage with situations like this. Did the department implement any of the recommendations that is in that document? And I can share it with you if you don't have it.
You can share that document with us, Chief. I don't believe that just because I've been here 30 years that I'm the only one that could speak to that, because we have a good staff here, and certainly an excellent chief. I believe you're talking about the DOJ, and that was well before President Obama's term.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when the consolidation of policies, and it was actually the city manager and the chief at the time actually asked the DOJ to come here. It wasn't a mandate, to help us professionalize that much further. But we've come a long way since 2003.
So you have information. Did you implement, because it's more of a community building, how to merge some of the departments and do a lot of community policing? Was that implemented?
I'm sorry, I keep hitting the mute button there.
Was the recommendation implemented?
Yeah, our philosophy in community policing has been implemented to, with due respect for any law enforcement that might be listening to this, I think we are the model for the state, and probably for the nation in certain parts when it comes to our interaction. As I said, in the HHS, and I believe others have said, is that we're a national training site for that. We have high standards for the officers, and we're recognized for the professionalism and excellence that come out of Portland Police Department, not just from the officers, but from the leadership group and the support we get from the community and private sector groups. So we've implemented, to my best of my knowledge, everything that was recommended. However, police work is a growing, with June 1st, we learn how to do things differently, and June 2nd and June 3rd, and here it is June 22nd. And I'm sure after this, there'll be, more recommendations from professional groups, advocates, special groups on different things, whether it be use of force, whether it be policy, crowd management. I truly expect, we'll be hearing from all others.
And then I know that on the 1st, you had information from Facebook and other social media on one of the protests where the mayor and city councilors were going to be there. It was supposed to be peaceful. I think someone from the department called businesses in downtown and asked them to close early because there's going to be a protest. Was there an information that you received that prompted your department to make that phone call?
Yeah, we got a call from downtown district and asked if there's gonna be a protest. We didn't urge anybody to close. I don't believe we've done anything other than, I know in a couple nights we thought parade routes might affect certain businesses. We called them directly to warn them in advance that they may see a group passing by. This is since the new opening of some of the street closures. So, we just, if someone asked us, that's what happened. They asked if there was going to be protests. We said yes, and that wasn't us to ask anybody to close and to surmise what they might do.
It was, I think, this particular rally that there was actually no marching, no nothing. It happened in front of the city hall. Myself and the mayor and some of my colleagues were there.
I'm going to ask Heath to jump in. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to let him.
Yeah, and we have to, and there was no, and this person engaged us before actually the rally. There was no passing around town or anywhere as part of the plan. But businesses in downtown did, I think 1 or 2 people messaged me. I use on Instagram to say that the police are calling us and asking us to close early because there's going to be a protest.
That there was one instance where one of our downtown businesses was had an issue with one of the protest organizers on Instagram. There was a video posted, and there was a protest planned for the next day at their restaurant. With the plan being that the post on Instagram was not favorable and was shared several thousand times. And I suggested to the owner that they not open the next day, knowing that at noon on a Friday, there was a planned protest in front of that business. And quite honestly, the employees were so frightened at the time that he was having trouble finding wait staff to work there. So I did ask one of the businesses to close.
Okay, I have a last question. Maybe it is here, and Mayor, if it is not a question that can be answered here, I am open to hold it. I will say it if this is not the right place to discuss it. I will hold it until when appropriate and which committee. I know that for the past few years, you are not fully staffed. Will you be open to, if we look at your budget and to take out the money that is not covered, the staffing that you don't have now, will you be open to a cut that will take that away from your budget or more?
So, Councillor Ali, I will jump in and sort of look to my colleagues. I know that we're trying to focus on the report right now, which is the June 1st protest and the police response. My sense, being relatively new to the council, is that would be a question that would be discussed in a finance committee meeting.
Okay, that is why I say if this is not the right place, as I'm talking, it came to my mind and I wanted to ask, but if it is not here, I'm also wondering if it is here or not. So if this is not the right place to ask, I will hold that back. I will actually write it down and then I will come to the next finance committee.
I think that would be the best idea. I think I'm getting nods from the council. I think that we want to stay as focused as we can right now on the police report that we're receiving tonight about June 1st.
Thank you. So
sorry, Councilor.
John, is that you?
Yeah, but I did want to interrupt Councilor Ali.
Councilor Ali, are you pausing for the moment?
I'm done, yeah.
Okay, thank you. City Manager?
Yes, I did want to respond to Councilor Ali's statement about that one of the organizers had been in touch with me on June 1st. That is true. I did have a conversation on the morning of June 1st with one of the organizers. Councilor Thibodeau was kind enough to assist with contact information, as was Councilor Ali, was very instrumental in helping make that connection as well. The conversation I thought was positive. I did ask for details of what was to be planned that evening. The person would not tell me details, but said that he would get back to me. if he felt as though he could share that information. I did not hear back from that person. I did text that person the following morning and did not receive a response. So while it's true I had an interaction with one of the organizers on the morning of June 1st, there were no details provided.
Thank you, City Manager.
Thank you, Manager.
Okay, we have several more hands up, so we'll continue with the questions. Thank you, Councillor Ali, and we will go to Councillor Ray.
Thank you very much. I think I just have a couple at this point because people have asked so many and covered so much material. So I think I can be pretty lean. I did want to say there was a lot of disturbing video, a lot of disturbing images that were presented tonight, and I wanted to thank Commander Sweat and Chief Clark and Major Gorham for continuing to emphasize that the majority of the protesters were peaceful protesters, that the majority of the people were there to, yes, to vent anger, but to do it in an appropriate, a constructive way, to voice their concerns and to call for change and to do it in a way that would hope to bring about change, and that there were these other groups that arrived for very different reasons. And I just want to thank you for separating that, because I think it's a really important piece. I also wanted to thank Chief Clark at the very beginning of this talk, and Councillor Thibodeau mentioned this. You did, in fact, use the word murdered to describe George Floyd's death. And I think a lot of people have been reluctant to say that, but it is much appreciated to hear that our police chief understands that there's really no other word for what happened in that situation. And I want to thank you for kind of having the courage to put that out there. One thing I wanted to ask about was, were there complaints lodged by people that were involved in the protest about their treatment by police, by people that were arrested? Have there been complaints as a result of this?
Not today, Councilor, no.
Okay, so there have been no complaints, then there would be no reason for the Citizen Review Subcommittee to be involved, because that's the role that they play right now. They review complaints to see if they've been handled appropriately. Is that correct?
Correct. All external complaints they review and rule.
Okay. So yeah, there's nothing for them to review. There have been no complaints.
Correct.
Okay. So I want to differentiate. I have heard concerns from the community, from things that people witnessed. People thought, I think, that some of the pepper balls were rubber bullets. And this stuff is disturbing to watch. It's very disturbing to watch. And so I understand why I'm getting a lot of this reaction from the community. But it's, it's valid. People can be concerned about the way that our police interact with the community. That's perfectly appropriate. I'm happy to hear those messages. But the fact that there have been no complaints, that speaks volumes to me. The people that were arrested have not complained about their treatment.
6 hours, 23 arrests, interactions with obviously thousands, of people by our officers, and that's correct. No formal complaints have been received at all. I've heard the same concerns from third parties, but no complaints from people in impact.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask, now I think that between Councillor Doosan and Councillor Thibodeau, they really covered the mutual aid piece, and you guys have talked about that a lot, about interacting with other departments, because I do think that was a potential concern. I wanted to ask a little bit about the dynamic of what was going on at 109 Middle Street that night, because I guess I was a little surprised to see protesters climbing the steps and kind of trying to get past the barrier. And then I heard on one of the calls, I think it was an officer. I'm not sure if it was an officer or a dispatcher who said, when there were cars trapped on Franklin, we don't have more to send you without giving up 109. So it almost felt like there was there a feeling that protesters were attempting to get into the police station, to take over the police station, to vandalize what was going on there?
Yeah, Counselor, that was me on the radio that said that.
Okay.
And so at that point, yeah, I had stationed officers at all the entrances to the garage. Obviously, we house all of our cruisers in that garage. They had started trying to break out windows of the cars. And the night before, the department had been vandalized. But at that point, they had removed the barriers at the bottom of the stairs and come up to that landing where you folks saw the video. So yeah, we had great concern about what would happen should they get into the garage with our cruisers and have access to all that, not to mention our first floor. So that was me calling the lieutenant, who said, I just said, until we have more officers here, I have no one to send you.
Okay.
And within the department, we have a regional PSAP, controls communications for 3 jurisdictions, both fire, police, and I mean, it's not just physical damage. I mean, we can't lose the PSAP. That would be a tremendous problem.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, the police, PSAP is our police communications center that dispatches fire, police, EMS, and throughout the region.
Right. Before that, the pepper ball was used, pepper ball system, before it was used during the arrest, there was a lot of radio chatter back and forth about who had it and kind of getting permission to deploy. Is that typical before pepper ball is used?
Yeah, well, we were very cognizant of what people were seeing, and we could go on a call. There could be a police officer on the call right now, and they have a pepper ball system with them. It's a non-lethal force that they can use at a distance. Someone was suicidal, they had a knife, and they can do that. We were trying to be careful on making sure we had those resources and we knew what we had. And if we were going to deploy them, that they didn't get lost in the crowd, and we couldn't secure them. And certainly there was many hours that we didn't want to bring specialized equipment. We could have lost it, or that person wouldn't have been very effective out there with that tool. So they were kept back here in 109 and deployed out when it was deemed necessary.
Okay. And then I think one thing I kept trying to figure out, and I'm sure that you were constantly trying to figure it out throughout the course of the night, and you have much more perspective on this than I do, but it's hard to understand how much police presence, as you increase the presence, does it escalate as people see more police? Do they become increasingly agitated? But at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, but you can't leave because you are essentially protecting the police station. But also, were you getting calls for service at the same time from the area? I would imagine there were a lot of people calling in and saying, there's a group outside here who are doing this, and there's a group that are doing that. So it's just a very difficult balance, I think, to strike and to understand what's going to be the most effective. So if you can just kind of talk about that a little bit.
I'll talk, and then I'll shift it over to the chief and the major. Is that the command center? We're obviously the instant command management. We're getting calls for property crimes. We obviously showed you at least one video of burglary and looting, if you will. There was multiple, and we couldn't send officers there, unfortunately. We just prioritized the calls for violence. If there was a domestic, Falmouth PD actually handled a call for domestic. Actually, chief of police from Falmouth handled a call for service in the city. And that's how we prioritized what calls will be handled. And Heath, you want to jump in there?
So it was trying to prioritize the police interaction. I think from very early on, we realized when they came up the steps when they first got here that there was a different feeling among the crowd, and certainly our police officers were the target of the crowd. And so we tried multiple times throughout the night to disengage. and to move back and move officers away. That really is after the truck had gone through and we got that driver out. The conversation I had with the lieutenant on the ground was disengage and move your folks back to the police station. And when they attempted to do that, the crowd followed them. And that's how we wound up out there on Franklin, is that we couldn't disengage. Where we went, they were going to go. And we were concerned about bringing them around to the back of the garage where all our cruisers are stored. So that's how we ended up on Franklin. But disengaging was something we had talked about multiple times, and we're at times successful during the next couple of nights at being able to back off and create a little space and dialogue. But on the first, the crowd was just incredibly amped up.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to stop there because I think other things that I wanted to talk about, most people have covered, and I want to make sure others that still have their hands up get a chance to talk. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Ray. Councilor Tong, I'm going to jump over you and let others go first, and then I'll come back to you. Is that okay? Okay, so Councilor Mavadonis.
Thank you, Mayor. Like others have said, when Councilor Dusson and Thibodeau start, they get a lot of the questions out early. Like Councilor Ali, I took a lot of notes. And I do want to start by saying, certainly with the murder of Mr. Floyd, I don't think any of us were surprised, or maybe we were surprised at the magnitude of some of the protesting around the country and in Portland, but we certainly, I think, all knew that there would be protesting. And I think by and large, the majority of it was peaceful. I do want to also thank the chief for your comments, and also the letter that you and Les and Eric put out, I think was really important. So thank you for that. And I went to two of the protests. One we were invited, I believe it was on a Wednesday night, and I think almost all of us were there. You were there, the chief, and Jim and Heath, you may have been there as well. I also went on Monday night. Our council meeting ended remarkably early. I was told I probably shouldn't, but I drove in and drove down India Street and over 4 and found myself parking on 4th Street by the Regency and walking up to Central, just because it seemed like there were people there. So I was not there. I was home, probably by 10 o'clock. So I was not there later, but I will say that I did watch into the early morning hours, thanks to, I think it was Channel 6 and Channel 8's Facebook live feed. So I just point that out because I spent some time in front of Central Fire Station with my mask on and behind the hedges in front of the monument and watched what was going on. And when the crowd moved down Middle Street, I went down Market Street with a lot of other people, especially when they moved from in front of Central down to Middle Street. So I felt like I had a good sense at that time of what was going on. I mean, the majority of people I saw were in front of Central some were very loud, but I would say they were peaceful protesters. I spoke with some folks who asked me questions. They were polite young people. I watched the police officers. I couldn't tell if they were all from Portland or from other departments, but I saw a lot of restraint with people up in the officers' faces. And I continued as I went down to Middle Street. There was literally a sea of people running down from Spring Street, down Middle. Thank goodness nobody fell and got trampled, but and people were very polite at that point as they passed me on Middle Street. So I feel like that night, at least until I was home by 10 o'clock, I had a sense, and then I watched on television. And really, I do think from my observation, most people were peaceful. I talked to Councilor Ali about this the next day. I did see when I was in front of Central and then again on Middle Street, there were some people who were, I would call it working the radio. And they were just trying to, I don't know how to put it, trying to gin the crowd up a little bit at times. I don't know what they did later in the evening, but that was something that I I did pick up on. A couple of things. One, I do want to just confirm, and I think Councilor Doosan, probably she and I are the only ones who were here on the council from the Department of Justice allegation back in the early 2000s. And I just want to confirm that that was at the request of the city, of the manager and the police department. And I do think it's worth taking a look at that and just to see what we did in time. There may be people, I know there, Jim, and there are others who were working in Portland at the time. There may not be a lot of people left, but that was definitely an invitation or request to come in our department at the time, given some incidents that had gone on. I'm trying to look down my notes because most of my questions have been asked. In terms of the video that you showed us tonight, and there were a lot of clips and some still shots. Again, my time at front of Central Fire Station and before I left a little before 10, what I saw didn't seem inconsistent with most of the people who weren't creating trouble. And I thought that was very helpful to see that video. That's your video. And I ask this because I'm sure others will. Is there other video that might give us some concerns has not been shown us tonight?
I'm not aware of any, Counselor. Actually, I obviously haven't seen all the footage. Is probably with 100 and some odd. I don't know how many cameras would have been out there actually from our department, but dozens and dozens. It would be hundreds of hours of looking most specifically at the footage related to the mermaid, and all that footage will go over to the district attorney's office as well, because that's where all those cases are going to be residing. And then the other footage that we'll look at most specifically is going to be relevant to the use of force reviews that we'll be doing next month. So, but no, at this point, I'm not aware of any more concerning. And we had staff, actually non-sworn staff that's here. And again, my kudos to them for going through and trying to paint, provide this information in a way that kind of flows and makes sense. And they went through hours and hours of it, and I haven't heard of any concerns from them.
And I'm not in any way suggesting that you're only giving us a certain side of the video, but I asked that question and let you respond to it. And again, I'm sure my colleagues did stayed up well past my bedtime watching on the live coverage from the local channels. In terms of objects being thrown, rocks, bricks, we saw bottles. We could hear at least one break in one of the videos. In urine, bottles of urine or something with urine in it. How often is that something that police officers in Portland experience? Is this just a different level, or from time to time you run into those type of things? Obviously, it's larger scale. But do you run into a lot of times where objects are thrown at police or urine is thrown at police?
No, very often. We might deal with an individual that's has things that aren't that, but nobody's filling bottles in the Old Port, and it's a very ugly thing to be doing, obviously.
In terms, just broadly, and you've mentioned it a few, I think, how does the incident command structure work? Is it the officer who's standing on that line, who is making a decision about how he or she is going to react? How does that work?
No, I'll give it to the ground guy. But obviously, when I left Central Fire Station, I consulted with the chief and the major, and we said it's time to go into incident command, unified command. I'm operations, and it would run that. The chief, whether it be police officers and or fire personnel, would be participating and or letting us know what the recommendations are. And also we may set some very different boundaries for the operation. Like I explained to Councilor Ray that we didn't deploy any pepper ball systems, although we've had them, just because we wanted to not be so. Then we looked to the early stage was we had a lieutenant on the ground, and then we shifted to the major when we had multiple squads, if you will, of, I'll let him get into the very specifics, but each squad, each team is directed, controlled by a super, with a very unique purpose in mind, whether it be an arrest team and or a line team of, you know, force, that sort of thing. But I pass it off to the major here. Hey.
Yeah, sure. The commander covered most of it. For our general crowd management activities, we would have a lieutenant who runs the crowd management team, his secondary officer in charge, and then each team would be down into squads, 5 or 6 officers, with a supervisor being a squad leader. The idea being supervisor has control of each of those units. On that Monday night, because we had so many agencies coming from outside, as they came to the field, we identified folks who were a supervisor or the senior officer within that group of 4 or 5 officers lined together. And then there, I had 2 of our lieutenants and a sergeant from the state police who I was communicating directly with when I wanted movement, where I wanted them to move. If we wanted to use pepper ball, I communicated that to them.
Thank you for explaining that. I think, I do want to say, I mean, I think Portland has a long history of peaceful protests. I think our police department, as long as I've lived now, our police department has always been supportive and tried to make sure that whether a test that sometimes is organic and comes up quickly over the years has worked to try to make sure people are safe. Here that night and other nights don't all live in Portland, but we're even though we're a big town in most states, we're the largest city in the state, and we are a place that people come for a variety of reasons, including protesting. So my observation while I was there that night and watching it on video, majority of people were peaceful protesters. When I was standing in front of Central Fire Station at the restraint that officers were using, and again, people from my vantage point, they were just loud, and those close to the police were very close. Others were off going in a different direction. But I thought there was a great deal of restraint. And although I was not as close down on Middle Street, what I saw on television showed me that. So again, I take away the great percentage, probably 90 protesters were peaceful protesters. And I do want to commend, because I heard it on Wednesday night when we were all there. And I know you've said, even though there may not have been 1 or 2 organizers, there were community activists who were encouraging people to go home before things were being thrown or around that time. And I think they really need to be commended for stepping into the fray and saying, look, this is not whatever, these aren't necessarily their words, but this isn't what we're here for. But I think our police department, the men and women of our police department and the others that responded, showed an incredible amount of restraint. I think the fact that, as Councilor Ray asked, that there have not been any formal complaints paints a picture. That doesn't mean somebody couldn't file a complaint today. However, it's 3 weeks after the fact. But I do think that says something. There's no doubt, and I think it's already been said, that this evening and that week, particularly learning events in a lot of ways for the community and for our department. And I think there were things that I'm sure perhaps improve upon or do things differently. I don't know what those are, but I think for those of you who are in the police department, I thought it was a good question. I don't remember who asked it earlier about reaching out and talking to some of the people who we know organized or helped organize some of these events to talk about in the future. Are there things we've learned that we could do differently? So again, I'll wrap. I think this has been very helpful. I've learned a lot tonight from what I've seen and what I've heard. And other than a broader community community conversation. And as the mayor said earlier, I mean, we'll be talking about budgets for all the departments, but including the police department during the budget process. I'm not sure, you know, and I guess maybe we'll get into this later, but I'm not sure what I would be looking to investigate. I could discussions, but I am struggling to find what we would be investigating around this night, at least at a council level. I'm not saying we shouldn't have council level discussions about policy. I'd look to the mayor to build that process and work with the council around that. But that's kind of where I land at the end of this very informative evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Costa.
I think the chief was trying to reply to something.
I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. I was just going to say I kind of witnessed the same level of restraint, but two things you'd mentioned, as the Councilor Ali, about the 2003 Department of Justice report that the city had requested. And that was something actually I remember when I was in my former department looking at and trying to see what we could take out of that as lessons learned before we even needed it. So we will definitely take a look at that. Obviously that was 17 years ago. So the other piece that I know you all know that we're currently working on is the President's report on 21st century policing, which breaks down those 6 pillars, which includes community policing, community engagement, outreach, transparency, policies, oversight. I mean, a lot of the things that I think we're talking about tonight and going forward, and using that kind of as a framework as well. So we'll definitely.
And just one last thing to add is I just got a text. We do have the report in hand.
Great. Thank you both for that. And thank you to Councilor Mavadonis. And now we'll go to Councilor Costa.
Well, thank you everyone for being here with us tonight. This has been very helpful, so I'll just echo that. And since the hour's getting late, I'll try to just hit the point. And most of these are just things that I think it would be helpful if Chief, you or someone else could just getting them from members of the public, basically. So just for clarity's sake, was this the only night that week where we didn't have significant discussions prior to the beginning of the protest actions?
No, we didn't. Friday we didn't leading up. Saturday was a much smaller group, much more manageable group, but we did not. Sunday we did not, which is the day that the building here at 109 was tagged. This Monday, not. Tuesday was the same. I think the first lateral contact that we had with a family member, one of the organizers, and just trying to build that bridge. And then on Wednesday was the first that I felt I had with one of the organizers that week. And I did the same thing on Friday. I went over to Lincoln Park, and none of them did they offer any details of their plans of like where they were going to go and whatnot, but and have the understanding that we all wanted people to be able to peacefully protest and do so safely. So.
Okay, thanks. And then for clarification's sake, so we're referring to various numbers, but particularly the numbers of arrests. Is that specific to the Portland Police Department, or is that any law enforcement entity that was part of this that evening?
So I missed the first part of that question, I guess. What was sorry, can you repeat that?
The numbers related to arrests in particular, does that refer only to activity from the Portland Police Department, or is that cumulative for all law enforcement agencies that were present that evening?
Cumulative for the whole event.
Thank you. And then two just kind of rapid fire ones. One thing that seemed to be kicked around of some concern at the time, and I just want to know if this is factual or not. It was, I believe, the night before this that there was significant incidents in Boston that took place. Did that play into concerns about this particular event?
I don't think, and I'll let you guys speak differently if they feel differently. I mean, I don't think for me, until we started seeing the marked difference in the Portland as opposed to, because again, up to the point of about a half an hour to 20 minutes before the event, we just had the staff with Portland police officers. We were anticipating another peaceful protest. And it wasn't until we got to the point where the crowd started engaging our officers, both in the cars and personally, that we started to, again, bring in that extra response from outside. So no, it wasn't directly related.
It wasn't like intelligence specifically saying that. Okay. And then lastly, and normally I don't think I would ask this in a public session, but it's sort of out of the bag. One of the things that I suspect lots of us heard concerns about were the positioning of officers on the roofs at various times. Again, I don't know that I would have asked that normally, but I think that, so I didn't know if you could address that and to have that happen.
Obviously, when we started developing plans for subsequent days, more intelligence would come in. We definitely were seeing reaching out to other intelligence resources because we had just gone through, a rough Monday, and wanting to either counter protest with in the mention of firearms. We saw multiple social media forwarded to us, second level sources, if you will, about this. It's not unprecedented to observers that are capable of thwarting any attack on the protesters or the police officers. I look at it too, and as a citizen, it's tough to understand why those measures are put out there, and you always want to not see them when they're there doing it, and they were seen, observed. That night there was drones flying over them as well, but it certainly isn't a pretty image, but it's, nowadays in different, it's part of a plan of a football game or a certain college games where these people are put out to give us that ability to have oversight. And if you look at it, and it's difficult to know from, many citizens out there aren't happy with that at all. But as you saw the police car, you could see one or two people deep, so to speak. When you have a person in an elevated position and someone's approaching with a long gun, which we did see Tuesday, very close to our building by a private resource, and others that arrived with firearms and others spotted in the crowd with firearms, it raised a significant level of concern for us of what the intentions are when you come with firearms. We didn't stop them from coming, but advised, don't know for sure if they were armed, but they were represented to be that type of group. But there were weapons here. Unfortunately, the visual images, are what they are, but they're and others. Yeah, and I just want to follow up with the drones. They weren't our drones. Obviously, we don't fly the drones. Some other group, we never knew who they were, brought a drone and was going over the crowd, which is obviously unacceptable and dangerous, but we didn't deploy that equipment or any of our assets, if you will.
Thank you, Commander. I'll stop there. Thank you, Mayor.
I'm muted. Okay, thank you, Councilor Costa, and we'll go to Councilor Cook.
Thank you. This has been a good number of questions, and I appreciate everybody's questions. So I appreciate that, and I want to say thank you to the chief and the department. Put together information to share with us and the public. First, I want to make sure that the presentation that we received tonight, I do not believe that was uploaded prior to the meeting. I want to make sure that that will be publicly available and give you a chance to say where that would be available for those who are not with us, that separately from the whole meeting.
Yeah, my understanding is that will be posted with the backup materials.
Okay, so people would either just rewatch the council meeting through the town hall stream or access it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So I have a few questions based on things that have been said or asked that I just have follow-ups with at this point. First is from a while ago. I've been taking notes. So there was a mention of the use of force review, and I wondered where the public and the council, of course, would learn more about what that committee process is, who's involved, when it's deployed, and how the public finds the results of that committee.
Yeah, the use of force committee is basically a standing committee that consists of command staff members in the department, internal affairs staff in the department, training staff in the department, and it meets monthly. Uses of force department-wide, just as a matter of course, that have taken place since the last use of force review. So there was one use of force review already in June. The next one will be in July, which will take up most likely when all the paperwork is compiled, the uses of force associated with this arrest. So that's something that we do internally. And then at the end of the year, and the one that is for 2019, at the end of the year, there's a report that's generated by our internal affairs lieutenant, one that's actually going to be coming out for 2019 at this point, because the data is all currently compiled. So that's something that our intention is to begin. I don't know that they've been posted online previously, but to begin posting the annual, they are already. So it sounds like it's something that has been done. Historically, it is something that we're going to be just posting online, as it gives it an overview for the entire year and all the uses of force involved, and kind of does some analysis on it as well.
Just to follow up on that, if 2019 isn't ready yet, the one that has been posted would be from 2018? Okay. And at some point in 2020, we would see the 2019, and it's like you said, it was sort of a summary.
It's a multiple page. I just got it last week. It's a multiple page, 15 to 20 page document of the individual uses of force, the type of force used by the officers. I think it breaks it down by day of the week, time of day, by race, by age, by gender. Like there's all sorts of variable into it, and that's what the end result is. That's where the end result of all uses of force go on an annual basis.
That's great. But another follow up on that. The data points are interesting. Is there an analysis of whether the use of force was appropriate within that report? And so, in other words, by community members looking at that report, would they see whether this use of force review committee, which is all internal from what I can tell, determined whether the use of force was appropriate, or maybe applied, and what remediation measures were taken?
I don't know if it gets into that minutia in this report itself, but I'll belabor this. I mean, this being my first year, this is the first report that I've seen for this particular department, so I don't want to misspeak either. But can obviously let you know the details of that, and we can always look at the 2018 report, and this one will be coming out, sure. But what you just talked about is actually, oops, sorry. What you just talked about is actually a process that use of force committee meetings themselves, monthly ones. So the staff that's there takes a look at the individual report and determines if it's in policy. And we talked about it at the HHS Public Safety Committee. There's a list of questions that, make it, is it within policy? Could it have been handled differently? Was the level of force appropriate? Could a different option have been used? So those are all questions that we look at on a case-by-case basis. And if there was some feedback that we have for the officer, either in terms of like training or something, that's actually done, much more in the moment with the officer. It's, like on an annual basis when this overall analysis report comes out.
So I'm looking on the webpage.
Right, thank you.
It's I think it goes back to 2014. It's there on our webpage.
Right. I was just trying to understand the amount information that's in it, as opposed to sort of just pure data, if you will. But thank you. I appreciate that explanation. My next question is a follow-up to Councillor Duson's question. and I thought she was going down a certain road to ask whether in the preparation of this presentation that the police department has given us tonight, whether the chief or any other members of senior staff in the police department have spoken with or interviewed or reached out with the protests, whether they had concerns or not, in preparation of this particular report. So, but post June 1st, to get their perspective on what happened first and June 2nd. I know that the council, for instance, and maybe the manager, I can't remember who was included, we got emails, for instance, from teachers in our own public schools who had concerns about actions. And so I just am curious as to the level of outreach and whether any conversations were had and information factored in from those in the community.
Not directly relative to the preparation of this report. I think we can always do more outreach in that area. I have maintained some contact with one of the organizers and have communicated with them about the protests as they are upcoming and their concerns relative to them. But in regards to like feedback specifically related to the June 1st event in this report, no.
Okay, so just to confirm, if I understand, the internal review of the police department is it only Portland police actions? Was it law enforcement actions? Because I recognize that we had a significant number of different police forces, if you will, cooperating and here in Portland. So to that scope, did you do of just Portland's police actions, or was it of all of the law enforcement activity?
All the law enforcement activity was included, and that's actually going to be reports that were that the major's actually still compiling. So yes, it dealt with the entire, everything from command and control of the event down to the officers on the line and the actions that were taken there.
Great, thank you. And obviously with the presentation, you all selected a number of different video clips, both from what appears to be police, also some maybe pride of business. I think I saw, I'm not sure where all the footage came from and whether that's cited or not in the report or the slide presentation. I think that would be helpful to understand the source for sure. But I'm just curious, were of the sort of body camera footage, was any of that from outside of the Portland, just Portland PD police body cam footage?
That was just Portland PD body cam footage. And the others were from the one business that was burglarized on Commercial Street and another third party open source video that was posted on Reddit, which was actually the one that kind of captured from a distance or an overview the cruises being surrounded on Franklin Street.
Yeah.
And then the other one was our pan tilt zoom here at the police station, which kind of showed the intersection of Franklin in the middle and the tractor trailer going through. That perspective there is the one from the external PD cameras.
Okay, I appreciate that. Able to use the body camera footage. And should I take that to mean that body camera footage is publicly available by request?
By our police attorney, just to make sure that it was not. So it's blanket. The footage that was used was looked at to determine whether there were any privacy issues, whether there were any personnel issues, whether there were any FOA or so the other laws are Freedom of Access Act and the Criminal History Records Information Act, CREA, whether there's any violations there in terms of their release, and they determined that there wasn't. Obviously some of the footage, footage that would actually capture arrests identification of arrestees, people that are where there's active investigations, those sorts of things would still be deemed to be confidential, I'm sure. But there'd be something that have to be reviewed by the attorneys on a.
When you say police attorneys, you mean our corporation counsel's office?
Right here in the police department, actually, that deals with a lot of our any Freedom of Access Act requests. That's something that she does. The camera and other footage.
And is that so? That's state law that governs the body camera footage. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I think it's helpful for the community to understand if they want to see footage. I also have put in a request actually that I've not gotten a response from regarding whether that's available in the situation. I put it in well over a week ago to see if there was any restrictions. I've not gotten a response on that. It was, of course, not to you, Chief Clark. It would have been to the all right, so the next question that I had, if I could, Mayor, it was a follow-up to Council. What did we learn, June 1st, based on what happened? Obviously, unprecedented. I think we got that, messaging that this was something not seen in Portland, before. So certainly not something we would have expected to see. I appreciate both. They come with their a huge challenge because we're not drawing on any experience and certainly we plan for them. And so I can like Monday morning quarterbacking. I'm a big fan actually of sports analogies, not being a big sports fan, but there's the one I could come up with. So I'm sure this seems a bit Monday morning quarterbacking of looking back and sort of, trying to see what happened and what could we do better. But I do think that what's useful is not in the criticism part, but in the learning part. And so what could, not from a tactical standpoint or strategic standpoint, as Officer Sweat had maybe answered this question, but what did we learn? Were there any mistakes that we saw that law enforcement officers, obviously not just Portland Police Department, because as you said, you've reviewed the state police actions and all of the other communities who responded and sent officers to help. What that were made that we might do differently that we could share with the council and with the community?
Yeah, I think that's maybe premature on just where we're at in our after action reporting process. Say we'll probably be having all of those available to us, as well as the use of force reports sometime here in July. So in the coming weeks, we're also planning on doing, once we kind of sit down from a command level and kind of look at those things, we want to meet with all our lieutenants. We want to do a debriefing with everybody and get input, asking the questions that you're exactly asking right now, which is what can we do differently? I mean, just looking at it from the command level side of things, I think we already kind of talked about what we did learn out of the gate here was I would much rather have the resources on hand to handle a particular set of circumstances or situation ahead of time and not need them than to put ourselves in a situation where we don't, and to have to react and go into like the mode, which was more of a crisis mode and management mode. So we've had the resources in, I think, in advance from there on out. Staging areas, more effective mechanisms to deploy our officers from, which allowed us to have more control over, again, kind of what sort of equipment do they have, what are they deploying with, who are they with, who are they responsible to, and what's the chain of command. So again, looking at it just strictly from a command level, that's I think where I'm at, and I'll kind of defer to these guys if there's anything more on a operational level, but we'll be figuring out a lot more of this going forward as well.
All right, so it sounds as though there might be an additional report potentially, even internal, that could be shared publicly as to sort of the learnings, if you will. And I have one additional follow-up, and that was to Councilor Costa's question regarding, the officers stationed on top of buildings and people's concern. Question really is, there was an initial public sort of statement about what those officers were doing there. And I believe that was communicated even to the mayor, who council. And then there was a modified or sort of changed version of what was going on top of those buildings. And I just wanted to get a sense of what the change.
I think, Councilor, I can speak to that. I'm the one that spoke to the first time. As the week progressed, things changed, obviously. But going into Tuesday, which was the second into the third, there was more information coming directly to us that people were coming with firearms. And that's what got us to use the observers. As the week went on, the visual need was still there to see deeper down the street, but we didn't really, I don't think there's a change in the reasoning. I think just clarity of the fact that we deployed that resource later in the week. We were concerned that might occur again. So does that make sense?
I appreciate the clarification. I understood one story and then understood that it seemed for you back to the Portland Press Herald reporting on it that referred even in the reasoning and standing in the community. But that would be something that I think is, we have in the city, who I'm sure the press, if there's a misunderstanding in the public sphere as to whether there was a change in reasoning for those folks, I know I would appreciate that, and I'm sure many members of the public would as well.
Are you talking about I think what happened is our PIO released information that he wasn't aware of the operation to begin with. And then on Wednesday night, I made a clarifying statement wasn't aware of the deployment of the resources. So if there's a correction to be made, I hope I've cleared it up now. But I'm going to pass it off to the chief and ask him to speak.
Certainly, and certainly you can read I'm sure you can read the paper and see other news reports about it. And if there's an additional clarification, I'm sure everybody in the community would appreciate that.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not sure if this speaks to it or not. I'm not sure specifically what the distinction or change was, I guess, off the top of my head. But we did, after, obviously, on this event here on Monday, we had the reports of the potential. There was social media posts and information about it on preceding the event on Tuesday. There were people found, during the event. We made contact with people during the event that were armed. The spotter teams that were on top of the roofs here in the area of the police station were that. I know initially, I think, and this may be what you're speaking to, I just want to make sure, but I know initially we were showed the question was whether or not they were armed with a weapon that was pointed at the crowd. With the photos that we were showing, the information that we had, they weren't. They were actually spotting scopes initially, and that was essentially what was being used. There were there was another agency that was involved as well during one point during our after action report, a weapon that was actually visible and displayed as well that had a scope on it. So I don't know if that's the distinction that you're talking about or not. But I'm just trying to make sure that you have what we have at this point.
I appreciate that, and I guess I would just ask that you go back and read the press reporting and make any clarifications that are necessary. Thank you.
Are you all set, Councilor Cook?
Yes, okay. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I'm going to jump in here and say that I know there were questions early on about the officers stationed on the roof. What I tried to clarify with the city manager and get out to the council was that my understanding was that there were scopes that were being used for visibility. But I'm not aware of any change to that, either. And so, my understanding was that there were visibility tools, and that's what I shared with the council. I don't know, Chief, if you want to say anything more about that, but it sounds like there's continued questions about that, and would happy to have you address that at some point, either tonight or later, if that's better.
Yeah, I'm not specifically familiar with the reporting, but yeah, there were all of our folks on our spotter teams were using scopes, they're called, which is kind of an oversized. It looks like essentially an oversized scope that you would see on the top of a rifle, for instance, but it sits on a tripod. It's something that you can use to from an elevated position, which is the benefit of being on the roof, to kind of scan a large crowd with. So, but the teams also did have rifles with them at the time. So I think that's where maybe some of the questions or concerns had arisen early on. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I know too that another confusing element in there was privately hired security guards that were stationed at different or at a business. And so that was, part of, I think there were questions out there about whether or not that was police or if it was something separate. I think the newspaper did a good job reporting that those were not Portland police. They were folks by a business. So I have just a few questions that I'll put out here. In reading the manager's backup memo today, I learned a little bit more about this order to disperse. And you mentioned it many times in your report. And if everybody had dispersed, there would have been no arrests, because there actually was an order to disperse before the first arrest was made, I believe. The manager's memo cites state statute that actually gives the authority of police to disperse crowds in the interest of safety. I'm just wondering if you think that folks under disperse was actually like an enforceable act, that this was more than just a kind of because you did it many times and it was adhered to differently at different times. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that, because with an order to disperse, but do you think the crowd understood the seriousness of those orders?
Yeah, it's a valid question. I mean, the arrestees that after, and I think there had been 4 or 5 orders to disperse at that point of formal nature, and others of the more informal, like go home now or you're going to go to jail. So there was certainly the I think it was made clear from the lieutenant what the consequence would be, that the jail was certainly the option. Whether or not that was based in law as opposed to some, I don't know, but certainly once we arrested the first person or the second person and we're still ordering people to go home, the hope was that people would go home. And I think you heard actually even before the first arrest was made, the lieutenant that was at the intersection of Pearl and Middle Street, made that comment over the air, like, they actually dispersed, and they, like, this is a good thing, no arrests made. And the commander made reference to, let's hope that this stays along, along these lines, along this track, or words to that effect. That actually is one of the things that we have better memorialized, I think, since June 1st, was an actual formal written dispersal order that we're giving to our lieutenants on the street for the rest of that week, in order to make it clear that this is the order, this is the direction that you need to go to get out of here. The time is to go now. You're subject to arrest. You're subject to exposure to chemical agents. That sort of thing, to kind of give those ultimate consequences or potential consequences on what could happen were they to stay there. So great question.
Thank you for the explanation. Yeah, it was something that I just learned. So. The next thing I just want to kind of touch on that was talked about earlier was when mutual aid comes in, are there shared expectations about basically how to react? And I don't, it's not a question to be answered. It was just more of somebody used the word regional. I think it was Councilor Ray maybe who talked about the regional response and shared expectations when it comes to mutual aid. And it seems to me like that's something pretty interesting, because when you do could be some differences, and it speaks to, I think it speaks positively to the efforts that are made to be a region that supports, where we support one another.
Actually, can I just make a comment on that? Because that's actually thing too, like we, at the end of last year, and quite frankly, it was in anticipation of meeting that we were supposed to see here in August.
Yeah.
We were looking at partnering with some other regional departments, having some consistent training and some consistent practices when it comes to crowd management and control. So yeah, I think that's something that we're open to.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I did want to, I've taken some notes here, and I wanted to reply to Councilor Ali had mentioned some business closures on the day of a protest, I think June 3rd. Just to respond to that from where I stand, I didn't hear anything about that. And it sounds like, and I just want to clarify that no businesses were told to close because of a planned.
Yeah, the only one, and the major can follow up on it, but the only one was based on some specific issues involved in that one particular restaurant.
Right, but there was okay. I just thought I'd chime in and say that I didn't hear anything about that. So, okay, and then the last thing I think is kind of a follow up to what several counselors have touched on, which is possible next steps that include community conversations, and that could include organizers and police and potentially council and maybe the citizen review oversight group, and I'm sure many other stakeholders, but opportunity here as a next step to identify how to conduct community conversations that include multiple stakeholders and help us all figure out how to respond to the learnings. And I'm certainly happy to help and be a part of that work. So I just wanted to put that out there as a possible next step. It sounds like you're thinking about it too.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, and that's it from me, and I will go back to Councilor Chong.
I usually speak too much and ask too many questions, and I wanted to defer, but I've learned my lesson. So I just wanted to thank you, Chief Clark, for the presentation. I just have a couple questions. I have a comment and an observation. We all say this is unprecedented, and we've seen lots of protests in Portland, and like many of you, we've lived here for 40 years or 30 years, and we've never seen this in our lifetime. We've always thought that there was a tipping point when there were seminal moments. When I saw the Women's March in Portland, I've never seen a crowd like that, and that was a tipping point. We've never seen almost 10,000 people walk down Congress Street. That was a seminal moment. When family separation took place, that was a seminal moment. When climate change and students, protested on City Hall, that was a seminal moment. But I think what we have to be reminded is this is not a tipping point, but this is a boiling point. And the kind of emotional outpouring and outrage that people are feeling is different from all the other things that we have witnessed. And I believe that we have to treat it differently. The kind of, physical violence that people, displayed, we've never seen that before because people are emotionally raw and hurt. I think we can't treat it like another conversation or like another historical moment. And so I think we need to really look at it more. So the observation that I saw in this, and I'm not going to second guess policing, I wasn't there. I don't know what it's like to have 20, and being the only person in the car. But when there was empathy, the energy changed. When a community advocate, a female fierce community advocate, an African-American woman, took a bullhorn and told people to back off, the energy changed in the crowd. When police officers, took a knee with this, which changed, and there was quotes in there where people were hugging police officers and whatnot. And when one of the lieutenants said that, I want people to disperse, it seems to me that how you say and who says it makes a difference. And I'm just wondering if we could take that as a teachable moment, as a learning. And I think the messenger also makes a difference in these situations. Should also look forward to. The question I had was, I know everybody was learning and we were building the airplane as they were flying. The protesters were figuring out how to protest as this was happening, as well as police officers were figuring out how to keep everyone safe in this situation. We're all building a plane as we were flying, but I noticed that there were 2 or 3 videos where community advocates intervened. And I'm wondering if throughout the night you connected with them and asked them for help, or was that just so organic it was impossible to do? That's one question. And then the other two questions are related to arrests. Cumulatively, we had 23 arrests from all the different departments. I'm just wondering what the racial breakdown of the arrests were. And then the last question is basically, what can we do to be more empathetic in these situations? Seems like, and I don't want to second guess policing, but it seemed like there was more empathy at the beginning of the night, and towards the end of the night, it was kind of the fractured group. But when the police line was on one side of Franklin Artillery in front of Middle Street, there was one energy, and the minute you crossed the other side, it became more intense. I don't know if it was just because the energy changed or whatever, but I'm on just verbal judo. Is there other tactics in de-escalating crowds, or is this something that we're all learning? Because is there a way to figure out if there are negotiators within the crowd that you can talk to help disperse the crowd, as opposed to just kind of moving the line? And those are just emotional things I just wanted to ask. That's it. And I just wanted to thank you all. As when people can go home safely, that's just what happened that night.
Yeah, I think I'll probably go from the last question, maybe a little bit backwards, make sure I cover them all. But yeah, I mean, I think that was naturally happening, kind of those, I mean, I know we talked about the Lieutenant King. He was still engaging with at least one of the known organizers when one line was on, the police line was on our left on the picture, and the protesters in that group was on the right. The organizer and others in the crowd were certainly attempting to solicit compliance, as were we, to little effect or effect after a certain point in the evening. And it's always it's that balance of making sure that we're doing what we can to maintain order, disperse the crowd, but also to looking at what do we have for resources to protect the rest of the community, to respond to calls for service, making sure that our officers are protected. I mean, you heard the major talk about, not getting the actual crowd control equipment out to our staff. I think it was 45 minutes before the event was actually, over and done. So I think some of your points too, in terms of, communicate. You mentioned verbal judo specifically. I mean, that's something that all of our officers are trained in, along with CIT. I mean, I think they have that skill set inherently based on the training. But once it gets to that point, it's that, again, that balance of dealing with a crowd of 50 to 100 to 150 people, and making sure that their voice is heard and that they're communicating what they need to communicate to make sure that the crowd hears it is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and we have to have the conversations on what makes sense. It's so it runs the gamut. But did I hit your questions, or am I missing?
Yeah, it's just we're building the plane as we're flying, and we're all trying to figure out how to stay calm in a difficult, tense, long night. And the protesters are figuring out how to protest in a way they think is effective, and you've got people within the crowd saying heard or listening to each other. I get that piece. I'm just wondering, is there like a national model to diffuse crowds in a more emotional way, as opposed to just kind of like holding the line?
And that's something I think we'll look at when it comes to training. I mean, the regional effort, this is not something that obviously the Portland Police Department or any other department in this area handles, fortunately, to this extent on a weekly basis or even a monthly basis. But having the resource training and the equipment and the policies and practices in place to handle such a circumstance when it arises, or in preparation for the next one that may arise. I'll kind of ask that question to them as they proceed through the training and what kind of what best practices are, for sure.
And do you have the racial breakdown of the 23 arrests? I know we didn't have any complaints, so I was just interested.
We can pull out easy enough, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
No questions.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Chung. I appreciate that. I don't see additional hands up. We may still get one, but I just want to say to Chief Clark, Commander Sweat, and Major Gorham that we are so grateful to all of you for the presentation. Looking at hands, I know that we have other things on our council workshop agenda to discuss, but I'm trying to get a sense of, at this point, whether or not we're going to sort of move off the report and into other discussions, which I think, a prudent thing to do, and I continue not to see additional hands with regard to questions on tonight's report to us. So what I'd like to suggest is that, as I mentioned earlier, we did have a communication from the city manager earlier today with regard to an internal affairs investigation. And so what I'm hoping is that we can hear from our city manager briefly on that item, and then be able to move on to a discussion about the suggestion of an independent investigation. So, John, would you mind just reiterating what was in that email this afternoon and giving the council a sense of where things are with the summons?
Yes, Mayor. Talking with Chief Clark earlier today, he had mentioned that there is an investigation into the circumstances around the issuing of the summons. That does not mean that there was anything that was done incorrectly. It simply means that we want to make sure that we look at all aspects of what happened on that particular day, and then report back to the city council on those circumstances. So that is, we just want to be thorough in looking at all of the circumstances. And that's basically it.
Do you have any kind of a time for information forthcoming?
I would defer to Chief Clark on the time frame. Usually these are situations take some time, but I don't know if the chief is available.
Yes, he just stepped out for the moment. The investigation has been issued as a matter of course, and I'm hoping to be completed less than 6 promises, though.
Okay, I had a little interruption there. I'm sorry. Is are we're all set there? Because I have a couple of hands up with questions. Okay, Councilor Cook.
I was just trying to look back. I had put in regarding the Mr. McNeil situation, and to understand when certain questions might be answered. So, you know, some look at this from the inside, and I'm, you know, happy to wait until I get more information. But probably a week ago or so, I had asked the transcript or tape of the body camera, and whether that can be made public to the extent that that's allowed, and if it's not allowed, that too. And it, you know, just to get the facts out there. So I haven't received a response regarding whether my request for the body camera footage or transcript is public information, what the limitations are on that. So I again and see if they could get answered tonight.
Sure. It's a criminal investigation. And any evidence is sealed until that case is adjudicated.
Which, I'm sorry, the body camera footage of when the summons was being served. Again, not any footage of the alleged crime.
The attorney that said that is the process of vision. Plus, it's an internal affairs matter. One or two are and I'll get clarification on the criminal issue. It won't be made available until after that's completed.
Great. So if I could, I would, I think this email included both Corporation Counsel and the City Manager, that I get some written response as to those questions. Thank you.
I'll next go to Councilor Mavadonis.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few process questions on this item, because it's not something that would normally be adjudicated at a council level. I understand there have been complaints, and I think we need to get to the bottom of whatever complaints have been made, and I don't know what the answers are to that. But is this, do we have a formal complaint, or I say we, does this police department have a formal complaint that that you are investigating, or is this an internal investigation that you would do as a matter of course? If you can answer that question. And I don't know if that's to the chief.
Internal counsel.
So it's internal. At this point, we don't have a complaint from an attorney or from an individual. Is it safe to say, and this can be to you also, is it safe to say that the officers, I assume they're one involved in this, are those officers considered public employees for the and I'll leave it if Danielle would want to weigh in on that.
Councilor Mavadonis, I would defer, as the chief has mentioned, there's an attorney within the police department that handles most of their employment matters. And so those are not something that go directly through my office, but, and so I would defer to her on most of the answers to these questions, but I believe you're correct. And so they are entitled to certain, I know that Beth has made it clear that once something's in the investigation process, that those documents are confidential until that process is completed, including body camera footage and other things.
And my question may be also kind of where Councilor Cook was going. So if there's going to be a memo, that would be helpful. It seems to me, if in fact they're covered under the same law as other public employees. So if there are personnel investigations and things of that nature, it would be helpful to know if from a process perspective, the results of those or any investigation is a public document at any point, or if it isn't. I think it would be helpful to have that information up front, not necessarily this evening, but if there's a memo that's being put together, just so at the end of that process. I don't know the details. I try not to read that stuff in the paper. Just trying to understand the process. So I'll leave it, I guess I'll leave it at that then. So I would like us to, with the understanding that we don't have a complaint other than what's been out on, I would like to make sure that whatever internal investigation that is being done is thorough. And I'd like to understand the process about how that gets conducted and whatever the disposition of it is. So we all know what that will be up front. I guess that covers what I was going to ask, and it kind of follows, I guess, on what Councilor Cook was asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mavadonis. And Councilor Thibodeau.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to, I guess, just share the similar procedural concerns I had about the request. And, you know, I almost said this at the last meeting when this information was requested. But I mean, if we look at the entire conversation that we're talking about here, I know this individual well, but when we talk about what white privilege looks like, I just want to be 100% clear that we're not, this council has never asked for information like this about residents who have been concerned who happen to be African American, and nor have I seen two stories written about an individual who was African American who was given a summons. And so for me, I want to understand, I guess, what our authority is here. I mean, request is on the basis of how our department operates. One, I'm not sure if that's proper. in the but I can't help but every single time this issue comes up, that the people who were talking about some of these issues here, it seems to me that they're not being served when we're talking about the delivery of a summons. I trust that there is an internal. I would expect that. If there's not, I would want to hear about that. But I guess I'm at a loss, and I don't want to think I can say I'm pretty frustrated with a lack of understanding once we get this information, what's expected of us. And if I could get some clarity from our corporation counsel, that would be very helpful. But I saw those same social media posts. I want, if something was done incorrectly here, I want to make sure that we resolve that issue. But I also want us to be clear about when people who look like me or people who look like others Hoods looks like, unless we are going to start delivery of a summons, whether it's right, I can't sit here and listen to this conversation without getting a more full understanding of that. So I had to speak to express my frustration to my colleagues, and I hope that Corporation Counsel might be able to shed some light on what it is we're hoping to accomplish here, and really what our authority is.
I'm not sure I can shed any light that would be helpful, other than to say that in the charter, I mean, this is clearly falls within an operational issue under the city manager's purview. It would be handled in the normal course as is underway right now. Matter, as was mentioned by the chief. So that's going through its normal process as well. And so there's specific protections in place for those employees that we were talking about. And there's a way that we're going to proceed as we would in that normal course, usually, as you mentioned, without the council's involvement in that.
So just to be clear, though, if there was something to have been found wrong about the delivery of such a summons, that would be handled internally in a disciplinary way by our council and for the department, and through the investigation that was talked about earlier by the chief.
That's correct. That would be the normal process. That's correct, Counselor.
Well, I want to be clear. I think I want us to be doing things right, but I also want us to be taking on issues in an equitable basis. And so that's the point with which I raised that issue. So I appreciate the feedback, Corporation Counsel.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Thibodeau. I've got a couple more hands up on this item having to do back to Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Mayor. Because Councilor Thibodeau has asked questions about in scope, I wanted to just review my email request, which again was not to have the council investigate the specifics of whether improper process was undertaken with serving this summons, but rather to get whatever information that is properly public out to the community to answer these questions. And so I think those are two different things, and I just want to make sure that that's really clear. So I said back on June 9th, I think it will be important that we confirm or refute whether one of the officers referenced Mr. McNeil's tweets or statements while at Christian's house. I would like us to receive the transcript or a tape of the body cam and make it public to the extent that is allowed. And if it is not, I'd like to understand that too. That's the question that has not been answered yet. So the facts are out there in the public. I strongly believe that we need to not only satisfy ourselves, but more importantly, the whole community at this time of heightened awareness and unrest. And so there are public. I'm not suggesting that this council focus its resources and time on doing the job of the police department in investigating an internal matter. I do think when there's a public situation like this, that our own city and police department are responding to on social media, that it's important to understand what information is allowed to be public and therefore provided, and what isn't. That's all I'm asking for. And so I just wanted to make that clear, since I felt like I was the one who made the request, and I wanted to make sure my intent was clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. And now we'll go to Councillor Ray.
Thank you very much. I wanted to thank Councillor Thibodeau for his comments. I think it's a really valid point that we're spending a lot of time on this. But I wanted to kind of frame this also in the manner that Mr. Milneal lives around the corner from me, and he's someone that I know. And he and I had a conversation following this about specifically that. And he was saying, here I am, a white man, and I have this interaction that we find very troubling. And within a matter of minutes, I tweet, I have a huge following. I get all of these responses. I get all of, my counselor lives around the corner. I know her. I'm able to call her. She comes over. And he immediately said, you know, this really brings to mind what happens when someone feels they're treated unfairly by the police, and they're not white, and they don't know their counselor, and they don't have these resources. And he was saying, I'm going to be fine. I have support. I have all of this, all of these people who immediately can reach out to people within the city. So I just wanted to make sure that as we're framing it this way, that we understand that Mr. aware of how privileged he is in this situation. And I was very aware, and it's an important thing for us to understand that there are, because of the color of their skin and because of the connections they've been able to make in life, are going to get treated differently in these circumstances. And I think it was a really valid point for Councillor Thibodeau to raise, and that doesn't mean that this is not something that should be pursued or understood, but again, for us to be aware of the circumstances and the biases that we are all living with all the time.
Thank you, Councillor Ray. No other hands up at this point in time on this issue. It sounds like more information will be forthcoming. And so I'll move us off a resident and into the last part of our agenda, which is a discussion among the full council about the request that was made, or the suggestion that was made, that there be an independent investigation of the police response to protests in Portland. And so as we contemplated the next step, I believe it's awfully important to have the full council weighing in on this matter, because it would become a council act. I do want to remind folks too that next Monday, anticipating that this was going to be a fairly lengthy evening, which it has been, next week we will get together in a workshop after an executive session to talk about next steps generally, because it's been on the minds of folks on the council and folks in the community and staff that, you know, we've had the opportunity to hear from Portland Police on June 9th at the HHS committee, HHS and Public Safety, I should say. About the FY21 budget, and that will continue. We're here tonight having this report to the full council. And so I think it's appropriate, even beyond the scope of a discussion of an independent investigation, that we come back together as a council and we talk about committee work and council work and response and next steps from this council about issues and events that are happening and that we're working to respond to. But tonight and right now, what I'm hoping to do is get a sense of the council in terms of the request for an independent Danielle, I'm going to lean on you a little bit, either up front or as we get going, just to talk about what the action of the council would be. And there isn't a recent precedent, from what I understand, for the council to request an independent investigation. But if there's any context that you want to provide early on, you are the city manager, happy to have you weigh in. And then I'd love to look to councilors to participate in the discussion.
Mayor, I don't have, as you mentioned, I don't think I have a lot of examples to draw on, but given the breakdown I mentioned in the charter, I think that the appropriate vehicle would be, if the council was interested, it's very rough in my head what that would look like, but I think it would be some sort of recommendation to the city manager to undertake an investigation in some form or format. And so that would be the vehicle I would put out there as a possible way to achieve what you're talking about, if that's the council's will tonight.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is determine the will, but also reiterate that an independent investigation is something that the council can trigger, but which we actually direct the city manager to do. The authority to conduct the investigation or to oversee the investigation lives with the city manager. Am I right about that?
Yes, correct. And I would use a word instead of direct, I would say recommend. That you're recommending that he undertake that, because that's really an operational piece. And so that would be, but that would be a recommendation to him to undertake that investigation in the format that you would describe in the resolution.
Okay, so I think at this point we'll go and look for council input. And the first hand up is Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick clarifying question for Corporation Counsel, if I might. So how is a request to the city manager to undertake, in a resolution, undertake a investigation or a report, a review through a third party different from requesting that the city manager provide a report to the council initially made by Councilor Ali, which did not require a resolution?
I think the manager undertook that and provided it in terms of providing this additional action if the council wanted to take an action, which is what I understood what the mayor was talking about. A resolution, it couldn't be in the form of an order, given the breakdown in the charter that I described. So that the framework that I was operating under was that you were looking for some sort of vehicle to ask him to or recommend that he implement such an investigation, and I think a resolution.
Okay, so if I might, just to clarify it again, to make sure I understand what's being said. The initial request was for the manager to review and report to the council. The manager chose to ask the police department to conduct that, but there's not that we have a resolution, but that is certainly an option that an independent or third party review, assuming the council were to vote for that. Is that correct?
I mean, I would caution because of the dichotomy in the charter. I mean, I mentioned that he handles all the operational items, and the council has delegated through various chapters of the city code additional responsibilities and duties that are specifically spelled out. And so this would really be within his purview. I think this time he chose to move forward in the fashion that he did. He provided the council with his the full report that you saw this evening. If the council wanted to take additional actions, I do think it would be appropriate, and the only option would be to do it in the form of a resolution as I've described.
Okay, I appreciate the clarification. So essentially the manager had the authority to undertake either an internal or a third party review. Because he chose the internal review, at this point, if we wanted something different, we would need to formalize that and make a request through a resolution.
I
Did
think
I capture that right?
I think so. I think I mean, I think it would be in the form of a resolution, as I've stated. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Danielle.
I do want to jump in with a clarification there.